The sun was a rumor, a thin, watery line of blood leaking into the darkness at the edge of the world. It was not yet dawn, but the land was awake. Lone Hawk felt it in the vibration of the earth through his pony's ribs, a deep, humming drumbeat that matched his own heart. He leaned low over the stallion's neck, his hair streaming behind him, a black banner against the gray dark. The wind was a physical thing, a cold hand that scoured his face and tore the breath from his lungs. But he welcomed it. It tasted of dust, of pine from the high mesas, and of the raw, limitless freedom that was the only church he had ever known. Around him, the herd moved as one entity. 50, maybe 60 horses, the pride of the band, running for the sheer joy of the run. Their hooves were a thunder that shook the plains, a sound that belonged to this place just as the sky belonged, vast and unbroken. This was his land. This was his life. Every muscle, every sinew, every drop of blood in him was forged by this expanse of rock and grass. He was a son of the Comanche, and he was leading the horses home. He felt the cold air in his lungs, sharp as a knife, and let out a short, piercing cry that was snatched by the wind. It was a prayer. It was a challenge. In this moment, riding with the wind and the herd, he was not a man full of doubt. He was just the hawk, soaring. He slowed his pony to a trot as the light began to define the land, separating sky from earth, painting the distant mesas in shades of purple and deep indigo. His uncle, Red Elk, rode up beside him, his face a map of wrinkles that seemed to hold the memory of 1,000 sunrises. Red Elk's pony, a scarred old pinto, moved with a steady, ground-eating gait that spoke of endurance rather than speed. The old man did not look at Hawk, but kept his eyes moving, scanning the horizon, reading the subtle language of the land. They broke away from the main herd, turning south toward the place the people called the water that speaks of the sky. It was a sacred lake, a basin of impossibly clear water fed by an underground spring, hidden away in a shallow canyon. It was the heart of their territory, the place where the spirits of the ancestors were said to dwell, where the water was so pure it was used only for ceremonies and in times of great need. They dismounted at the canyon's rim, tying their ponies to a gnarled juniper. The air was colder here, still and silent. The lake below was a perfect mirror of dark glass, reflecting the first pale lemon light of the coming day. It was a place of profound peace, and that peace was what made the violation so stark. Red Elk grunted, a low sound of displeasure. He pointed not with his finger, but with his chin, toward the far western bank, 100 yards distant. There, Lone Hawk's eyes, trained since childhood, focused instantly. His stomach tightened. The peace of the morning evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar anger. Tracks, the clean, straight lines of steel-shod hooves, not the unshod ponies of the people. Beside them, 2 parallel ruts, deep and obscene in the soft mud near the water's edge. A wagon. "They brought a wagon to the water," Hawk said, his voice low and tight. It was a desecration. Red Elk walked slowly down the game trail, his moccasins making no sound. Hawk followed. The old warrior knelt by the tracks, touching the edge of the rut where the mud had crumbled. It was still damp. "Yesterday, maybe 2 days. They are not scouts." He picked up a small, dark object from the grass, a cigar butt, chewed and discarded. He held it out for Hawk to see, his expression hard as granite. "They are not soldiers. Soldiers do not come this far south alone. These are the other kinds, the ones who build—" Red Elk stood, his tall frame silting against the rising sun. He looked at the tracks, then at the still water, then at his nephew. "The white man comes closer. Nephew, he no longer rides around the sacred places. He drives his wagon straight through them." Hundreds of miles to the east, Evelyn Hart felt every jolt and shudder of the wagon in her spine. She was certain she was composed of nothing but dust and misery. For 6 weeks, she had been trapped in this wooden box, lurching across a continent that seemed determined to break her. The heat was a physical weight, the air so dry it cracked her lips and made her eyes burn. She pressed her face against the canvas flap, peering out, but there was nothing to see. Nothing but a landscape so vast and empty, it terrified her. The sky was not the gentle, familiar blue of Boston. It was a pale, bleached, enormous thing that pressed down on the flat, brown earth. She was afraid, and she was ashamed of her fear. This was the life she had read about in the dime novels, the great adventure west. She had imagined herself a heroine, brave and resilient, gazing with wonder at majestic mountains and noble, painted savages. The reality was grit in her teeth, the smell of unwashed men, and a profound, soul-crushing boredom broken only by moments of sharp panic. In her satchel, tucked beneath her spare corset, was the letter. It was her purpose, her father's neat, strained handwriting, sealing a bargain she had only vaguely understood. She was to be married. Captain Nathan Crowell. A name. A uniform. She had met him twice, briefly, at formal dinners in Boston before he was posted to this desolate land. He was handsome, she recalled, very tall, with cold blue eyes and a manner that was perfectly correct, perfectly polite, and utterly chilling. He was a man of discipline and importance. Her father, Thomas Hart, had assured her of this. His own fledgling ranch, established a year prior, was near the captain's fort. This marriage, her father had explained, was a good thing, a practical thing. It would secure her future. It would secure him. Evie closed her eyes, trying to conjure the romantic image of her Western life one more time. Herself, the lady of the fort, hosting elegant dinners. Captain Crowell, her dashing husband, protecting the frontier. It felt false. It felt like a story someone else had written for her, a dress she was being forced to wear that did not fit. She clutched the rough wooden seat as the wagon hit another rock, jarring her teeth. She looked out the flap again. At the endless, alien land. It was not like the stories. It was not like Boston. It was not like anything at all. And for the first time, a small, treacherous thought entered her mind. Perhaps she was not like the stories, either. At Fort Griffin, near the settlement of Dry Mesa, the air smelled of horses, lye soap, and frying bacon. Captain Nathan Crowell stood over a table in his office, the wooden floorboard solid and reassuring beneath his polished boots. He was a man who believed in solid things, discipline, order, and the manifest destiny of his race. The map spread before him was a testament to that order, a grid of lines and surveyor's marks attempting to tame the wild land it depicted. The man opposite him, Silas Kane, was a contrast. Kane wore a fine wool suit, gray despite the heat, and his hands were soft and manicured. He was not a soldier. He was a man of the railroad, which, Nathan was beginning to understand, was a different kind of army altogether. "The problem, Captain," Silas Kane said, his voice smooth and reasonable, "is not the terrain. The terrain is flat. God has blessed us with a flat path to the Pacific. The problem is the locals." He tapped a plump finger on the map. His finger landed inside a rough red circle, drawn in grease pencil. "Right here. They call it, well, it does not matter what they call it. We call it a strategic watering stop, the only reliable spring for 50 miles in any direction." Nathan looked at the red circle. He knew the place. His scouts had marked it as a primary Comanche stronghold. Not a village, but something more important, a religious site. "That is the heart of their territory. Mr. Kane, they call it the Sacred Lake. They will not give it up." Silas Kane smiled, a brief, thin stretching of the lips. "We are not asking them to give it up. Captain, we are asking you to remove them. The United States government, in its wisdom, has granted the transcontinental a right of way. That land," he tapped the red circle again, harder, "is now railroad property. Or it will be once the obstacle is cleared. Your fort was placed here for a reason. This is the reason. Nathan disliked Cain. He disliked the man's soft hands and the easy, arrogant way he spoke of displacing thousands of people as if he were clearing brush. But Cain was right. This was the reason. He was here to bring civilization to the savage, to replace the teepee with the homestead, the war cry with the church bell, and the buffalo trace with the iron rail. The lake was just a piece of that puzzle. A young private knocked and entered, saluting crisply. "Sir, a message from the telegraph station. Mr. Hart's wagon train is expected by the end of the week. He confirms his daughter, Miss Hart, is with them." Nathan nodded, dismissing the private. He felt a flicker of a different kind of satisfaction. Silas Cain raised an eyebrow. "Your betrothed arrives, a delicate flower for this wilderness. Captain." Nathan permitted himself a small, controlled smile. The marriage was an arrangement. Of course, Thomas Hart was a man of some influence back east, and his ranch was growing. An alliance between the army and the landowners was practical. It stabilized the region. It strengthened his position. But there was more. Evie Hart was beautiful. She was refined. She was a true lady from Boston, a prize that would underscore his own status and power. She was a piece of the civilized world he was building, and he would own her, just as he would own this land. "We will prepare a proper welcome for her. Mr. Cain," Nathan said, his voice clipped and final. He turned back to the map. "Now, about the lake. My scouts will move out tomorrow. We will see how sacred it is." The smoke from the council fire stung Lone Hawk's eyes. Or perhaps it was just his own weariness. He sat in the circle of elders, his back straight, his face impassive as tradition demanded. He was young to be in this circle, but he was the son of a great war chief, and his own prowess as a scout was undisputed. He listened. The talk was all of a circle. The same arguments, the same anger, the same despair. Red Elk spoke, his voice heavy. "We have fought the railroad. We have derailed their iron horse. We have taken their horses. And for every man we kill, 2 more arrive. For every rail we pull up, they lay 10 more. They are like ants. You cannot kill all the ants." A young warrior, Buffalo Horn, leaped to his feet. His face was painted, his voice hot with youthful rage. "Then we will die killing them. Will we hide like women while they build their stinking houses on our sacred water? Will we let them scare away the last of the buffalo? I say we ride. We ride now. We burn their wagons and their tracks and send them running back to the sea." A murmur of agreement ran through the younger men. Hawk felt the pull of it. It was the old way, the Comanche way, to fight, to be brave, to die well. But he could not silence the cold voice of doubt in his own mind. He had seen the white man's towns. He had seen their numbers. He had seen the repeating rifles that spat bullets faster than a man could blink. He had seen the telegraph wires, the talking strings that carried messages across the prairie in an instant. Red Elk was right. They were like ants. And the people were becoming fewer every winter. He felt himself caught between 2 worlds. His heart was with Buffalo Horn, with the ancient loyalty to his blood and his land. But his mind was cold, and it saw the truth. The white man would not stop. He would not tire. He would not go home. And this path of endless blood and vengeance, led only to one place. It led to the end of the people. He was beginning to wonder if there was any other path, or if they were all just ghosts, riding in a story that was already over. Later that night, the council dissolved without decision. As it so often did, the anger and the fear remained, a poison in the air. Hawk sat with Red Elk by a smaller fire, away from the lodges. The old man was staring into the flames, his face carved in shadow and light. For a long time, he was silent. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. "You are troubled, nephew. Your spirit is not settled." Hawk did not deny it. "Buffalo Horn speaks with a big heart, but his words are wind. We cannot win this fight." "No," Red Elk agreed. We cannot win, not in the way he means. He poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. There is an old story, a story our grandmothers told. From before time, they said that one day, when the people are pressed to the last river, when the buffalo are gone and the old ways are dying, a sign will come. It will come to the water that speaks of the sky. Hawk watched his uncle, wary. He did not like these old stories. They were for children. Red Elk continued, his gaze lost in the fire. They say a woman will appear at the lake, a white woman. She will come from the water, like a spirit, and she will be the omen of the great change, the sign that the last war has ended, and the new time has begun, a time that will be either the end of us, or something else. Hawk snorted, a disrespectful sound. A white woman at the sacred lake? That is a story to scare children into behaving. Red Elk turned his head, his dark eyes fixing Hawk with a sudden, sharp intensity. Is it, or is it a story to prepare men for the truth? The world is changing. Lone Hawk, the old spirits are leaving. Perhaps the new ones look different. He tossed the stick into the fire. It is just a story. He lay back, rolling himself in his blanket. Get some sleep. The world always looks clearer in the light. The next morning, the sun was low and the air was sharp with the promise of autumn. Lone Hawk rode alone. He had left the camp before first light, needing to clear his head, needing to escape the smoke of the lodges and the heavy weight of the council. He did not ride with the wild freedom of the day before. He rode for duty. He rode to check the perimeter of the sacred lake, to see if the wagon tracks had been followed, to watch and to listen. He moved silently, his pony's hooves muffled by the thick grass of the canyon floor. He approached the lake from the east, keeping to the shadows of the cottonwoods. The water was calm. A sheet of hammered gold rose in the early light. It was so quiet he could hear the wing beats of a raven passing overhead. He dismounted, quieting his pony with a hand on its neck. He scanned the opposite bank, the place where his uncle had found the tracks. All was still. He let out a slow breath. The beauty of the place settled over him, easing the tightness in his chest. This was what he fought for, this stillness, this history, this water that held the sky. He let his gaze drift along the shore, his eyes automatically cataloging every rock, every bush, every ripple. And then he froze. His heart, which had been beating with the slow rhythm of the earth, gave a sudden, hard lurch against his ribs. He did not move. He did not breathe. He simply stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The old legend, the omen, his uncle's story. It was all just nonsense, a foolish tale for a long night. He knew that. But there, on the far side of the sacred water, standing in the shallows with the morning light turning her skin to polished pearl and her wet hair to strands of dark copper, was a white woman. He was a warrior, a scout, a man who believed only in what he could see and touch. And in that moment, Lone Hawk, watching the impossible woman in the sacred lake, felt the solid ground of his entire life shift and crack beneath his feet. He did not know that his life, the one he had known, had just ended. The wagon train had stopped, not at a river, which would have meant relief, but at a shallow, bone-dry arroyo that smelled of alkali and dead things. Evie Hart sat in the suffocating stillness of the coach, listening to the men. Their voices were rough, edged with frustration. "That is the third dry hole since sunup," one of them said. Harlan, the wagon master. His voice was like gravel. "We are wasting time. The horses cannot pull on empty, and this dust is thick as flour." Another man, Milo, spat. "Heard tell of a big lake south of here. Spring-fed. Saw it on one of Fuller's old maps. He said it was big, clean water." Harlan laughed, a short, barking sound with no humor in it. "And Indians. Full of them. Milo, that is Comanche water. Sacred ground or some such nonsense. We are not paid to get scalped. We will push on to the Hart Ranch. We can make it by tomorrow night if we are lucky." Evie's head ached. The heat was a living thing, a heavy blanket that smothered her. Tomorrow night, another day and a half in this rolling prison. She had not had a proper bath in weeks. She was covered in a fine layer of grit that found its way into her eyes, her mouth, her very pores. She felt coarse and ugly and thoroughly defeated. When Harlan called for the noon stop a few hours later, the misery had become a quiet desperation. The wagons halted in a patch of thin shade offered by a low ridge of pockmarked, reddish stone. The men slumped against the wagon wheels, pulling their hats low, too tired to even eat, seeking only escape from the relentless sun. Evie sat in the coach for 10 minutes, the air inside hotter than the air outside. She felt the familiar, prickling sensation of being watched. The men tried to be respectful, to give her privacy, but she was the only woman. She was an object, a curiosity. She felt their eyes even when they were turned away. She could not bear it another minute. She looked past the wagons, toward the line of rocks. A thin path, barely a deer trail, wound its way up and through a narrow split in the stone. Where did it lead? She had been riding her own mare, a gentle bay, for the past few hours to ease her aching back. The horse was tethered nearby. The thought was wild. It was reckless. It was unladylike and dangerous. And it was the only thing she wanted in the world. She did not tell anyone. She did not ask permission. She simply slipped from the wagon, walked with quiet purpose to her mare, untied the reins, and led the horse toward the rocks. No one spoke. No one stopped her. In the heavy, heat-induced stupor of the afternoon, her small rebellion went entirely unnoticed. She mounted the horse and urged it forward, disappearing into the narrow gap in the stone. Lone Hawk was already at the lake. He had been there since the light had touched the water. He moved along the western bank, the one his uncle had pointed out, his body a fluid shadow among the cottonwoods and willows. He found the wagon tracks. They were 2 days old, as Red Elk had said. The sight of them filled him with a cold, righteous anger. This was the water that speaks of the sky. It was a temple, a place of power. To bring a heavy wagon here was a blasphemy so profound he could barely comprehend it. He followed the ruts, his eyes scanning the ground. And then he found something else. He knelt. The wagon tracks were old. These were new, from this morning. He stared at the impression in the soft mud near the water's edge. It was not a moccasin. It was not the heavy, blunt print of a cavalry boot. It was small, delicate, with a clearly defined heel. The print of a white woman's shoe. This stopped him. It confused him more than the wagon tracks. A white woman. Here alone, it made no sense. It felt like a trick, a trap. He rose, his senses screaming, every nerve alive. He moved more slowly now, his anger sharpened by a deep, sudden curiosity. He followed the prints. They led along the soft bank for 20 paces, then they vanished. But he saw why. He looked up, on a large, flat rock that jutted out over the water. Someone had left a pile of clothing. Not the buckskin of the people, it was a pile of strange, bright blue cloth. Evie followed the trail for perhaps 20 minutes. The narrow canyon of rock twisted, turned, and then suddenly opened up. She stopped her mare. Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected a pond. She saw a miracle. Below her, nestled in a perfect circle of green, was a lake. The water was not the muddy brown of the rivers she had crossed. It was a deep, impossible turquoise, so clear she could see the white sand of the bottom. It was surrounded by tall reeds and large, whispering cottonwood trees. It was silent. She listened, her head tilted, for a full minute. She heard nothing but the buzz of a dragonfly and the sigh of the wind through the leaves. This was it. This was the freedom she had read about. This wild, clean, secret place. She was terrified of being caught, but the need to wash away the grime of the trail, the smell of the unwashed men, The weight of her life was stronger. She slid from the mare, letting the reins trail. The horse lowered its head to drink from a patch of seepage. Her fingers, which had felt so clumsy for weeks, were now quick. She fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons of her traveling dress. Layer after layer fell away. The dusty blue wool of the dress, the corset, that whalebone cage that had imprisoned her since Boston, the heavy petticoats, the chemistry. She folded them, almost neatly, on a large sun-warmed rock. She stood for a moment, naked, at the water's edge. This was the most scandalous, the most sinful, the most freeing thing she had ever done. She felt the warm sun on her shoulders, the cool breeze on her skin. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. She stepped into the water. It was cool, not cold. It felt like silk against her skin. She waded deeper, the soft sand closing around her ankles. She let out a small sigh and plunged forward, submerging herself completely. The water was a clean shock, washing the dust from her hair, her skin. She surfaced, gasping, and pushed the heavy, wet mass of her hair back from her face. She felt clean. She felt alive. She waded out until the water was at her shoulders, a perfect, private bath, and closed her eyes. Lone Hawk was 50 yards away, tracking the strange shoe prints. When he heard it, a splash. His training took over. In one instant, he was no longer a man. He was a hunter. He melted into the brush, his feet making no sound on the damp earth. He moved toward the sound, a living part of the shadows, his eyes scanning, his hand resting on the knife at his hip. He reached the edge of the trees, a screen of willows, and peered through a small gap in the leaves. And he saw her. His mind emptied of all thought. It was the woman from the shoe prints. She was in the water. He saw the white skin of her shoulders. He saw the dark mass of her wet hair, clinging to her neck. He saw her tilt her head back, her eyes closed, a look of pure pleasure on her face. His first reaction was not lust. It was a profound shock. This was the legend, Red Elk's story. A white woman, in the sacred water. She had come from the water, just as the story said. He jerked back, pulling his head from the leaves as if he had been stung by a wasp. He turned his head away, his entire body rigid. A hot, dark flush crept up his neck and burned his face. He felt he had violated the lake. He felt he had violated her. This was a powerful, terrible magic, and he had stumbled into it like a fool. He had to get away. He had to... He took a step back, and his moccasin came down on a dry, broken branch. It snapped. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in the midday stillness. Evie's eyes flew open. Her heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. The sound was sharp and close. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She spun in the water, her feet slipping on the sand. She saw him. He was not a man. He was a shape, a silhouette, standing on the bank she had just left. He was half in shadow, half in the bright, blinding sun. A young man, dark-skinned, with long black hair that was not braided, but loose. He was wearing only a breechcloth and moccasins. He held no weapon. He was a Comanche, a savage. She screamed, a small, choked sound that died in her throat. She dropped, sinking until only her eyes were above the water suddenly feeling terrifyingly thin, too clear. She scrambled backward, her hands grasping for the tall reeds. Anything to hide her. Her cry cut him. He stepped partially out of the shadow. He held up both his hands, palms forward, a gesture he knew the white men used for peace. He needed her to be quiet. He needed her to leave. He spoke, forcing the stiff, awkward English words he had learned from a trader years ago. "Not here." His voice was low, guttural. She flinched, as if he had struck her. "Sacred water," he said. He gestured to the lake, then to the sky. He was trying to look away from her, at the trees, at the rocks, anywhere but at the water where she was. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. His duty was to protect this shore. "You go!" Evie was paralyzed by a shame so profound it eclipsed her fear. She was naked. He was there, and her clothes were on the rock, between him and her. She was going to be captured, raped, mutilated. Every story she had ever heard, every campfire tale of savage butchery, flooded her mind. She began to cry, silent tears mixing with the lake water. She had to get to her clothes. She could not stay here. She started to move, a desperate crab-walking motion along the bank, keeping her body submerged. The water was her only cover. It was a slow, agonizing process. She was moving toward the rock. She was moving toward him. He saw her terror. He saw her, a pale shape in the clear water, trying to get to the rock. He saw the shame on her face, and it made him feel ashamed. He turned his back. He turned his back completely, facing the trees, presenting his spine to her. It was an act of profound trust, or profound foolishness. His every instinct, every moment of his warrior training, screamed at him to watch her, to seize her, to control the situation. She was a spy, an invader. But the image of her fear, the wet tracks of her tears, he could not bear it. He stood, his muscles tense, listening. He was at war with himself. The warrior, she has desecrated the lake. She must be punished. The man, she is terrified. She is naked. You are shaming her. The legend, she is the omen. She is the sign. He heard frantic splashing. He heard the rustle of cloth. He heard her panicked, sobbing breaths. It seemed to go on for an eternity. Evie saw him turn. He just turned his back. She did not understand. She did not wait. She scrambled from the water, cold and shaking, her feet slipping in the mud. She grabbed her clothes. Her fingers were clumsy, numb. She pulled her chemise on, the wet skin of her body fighting the dry cotton. She did not bother with the corset. She pulled the heavy wool dress over her head, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten the first few buttons at her throat. Her boots, she shoved her bare, wet feet into them. She was dressed. She stood, breathing in huge, ragged gasps, clutching the front of her dress. He was still standing there, his back to her, as still as the stone beside him. I am decent," she whispered. He heard her. He waited one more beat, to be sure. He turned around, slowly. She was dressed. She was clutching her dress front, her face pale, her eyes wide and red and terrified. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, dripping water onto the shoulders of her blue dress. They stared at each other. This was the first true look. He saw that she was young, younger than he had thought. He saw that her eyes were the color of the sky just before a storm, a deep blue gray. He saw that she was not a warrior, not a spy, not a threat. She was just a woman, and she was more afraid than he had ever seen any living creature. She saw him. I really saw him. He was young, perhaps her own age, maybe a few years older. His face was hard, angular, with a strong nose and a mouth that was not cruel. His eyes, they were not filled with the savage lust she had been warned of her entire life. They were serious, they were wary, and was it possible they looked almost as embarrassed as she felt? She took a step back, her foot finding the path to her horse. He let her go. He did not move toward her, but he had to give the warning. "This lake," he said, his voice flat and serious. "Mine people." He pointed to the ground, to the water, to the trees. "Our place." He looked at her, and his gaze was hard now, the gaze of a guardian. "Your people come." He gestured vaguely to the wagon tracks she had not seen. "War. War." The word hung in the air, heavier than the heat. Evie did not know what to say. She could not think. She turned and ran. She grabbed the reins of her mare, fumbled her foot into the stirrup, and hauled herself into the saddle. She kicked the horse. perhaps harder than she meant to, and the mare lunged into a desperate, scrambling gallop, back the way she had come. She did not look back. She rode until her lungs burned and her heart felt like it would burst from her chest. When she was gone, Lone Hawk stood for a long time. The silence of the lake returned. A bird called, high and lonely. He walked to the water's edge. He looked at her small, hurried footprints in the mud, next to his own. Red Elk's story, a white woman from the water. He had seen her. He had seen all of her, for one blinding, world-ending instant. And then he turned his back. He had not harmed her. He had not touched her. He had warned her of war. He touched the flat, warm rock where her clothes had been. He had come to the lake seeking peace. To quiet the doubts in his own mind, he had found an omen instead. And he knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the peace was gone. She stumbled back to the wagon train, her mare lathered and trembling, her dress dark with water and mud. Harlan, the wagon master, was on his feet instantly, his face a mask of anger and relief. "Miss Hart, where in God's name have you been? We thought you were lost, or a snake bit." The other men, Milo and the rest, were staring, their initial stupor broken, their eyes raking over her disheveled state. Evie slid from the saddle, her legs weak, and clutched the horse's neck for support. She could not breathe. She could not tell them. She could not say, "I was naked in a lake and a savage saw me." I got turned around," she stammered, her voice hoarse. "I was looking for water. I saw someone." The air became thick. Harlan's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip. "Saw who, miss?" "An Indian," she whispered, the word feeling foreign and wrong. "A Comanche warrior. He was just there, by the lake." Milo, the teamster, spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the dust. "A warrior. Just one. What was he doing watching you?" Evie flushed, the memory of her own nakedness burning her skin. "I do not know. He was just there. I rode away. That is all." But that was not all. The story was out of her hands now. It became their story, not hers. By the time they made camp that night, the tale had grown. The one Indian had become a war party. Her simple sighting had become a narrow escape. She, in their telling, had been stalked and spied on by a savage buck. The men checked their rifles with a new, grim purpose. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and a new, prurient curiosity. They were seeding a hatred that she had not intended, a fire she had accidentally set. The next day, they finally arrived at the Hart Ranch. It was not the grand estate she had pictured, but a low, rambling house of raw pine and mud brick, clinging to a windswept rise. Her father, Thomas Hart, rushed out to greet her. He was thinner than she remembered, his face etched with worry, but his hug was desperate and real. He was relieved to see her, yet she saw his eyes darting to the wagon master, to the men, as if expecting a problem. The news of her encounter traveled to Fort Griffin before she even had a chance to properly wash her face. Harlan, in his report to the fort's quartermaster, made sure to mention the incident, painting it in the most dramatic light possible. It was not his fault, after all, that the young lady was reckless. It was the fault of the savage who had dared to show himself. At the fort, the report landed on Captain Nathan Crowell's desk. He read Harlan's scrawled note, and his concern was a cold, hard thing. It was not concerned for her safety. There was fury at the violation. A Comanche buck had been seen near his lake, the one he and Kane had discussed. And worse, he had been seen by his betrothed. The savage had dared to lay his eyes on what was to become Nathan's property. It was an insult to his authority, to his uniform, and to his manhood. Within the hour, he was in the saddle, a patrol of 12 troopers thundering behind him. He rode with a singular, chilling purpose. He was not going to investigate. He was going to be erased. They found the lake by mid-afternoon. The place was just as his scouts had described it, a perfect basin, a strategic gem, and it was violated. Not by the Comanche, but by him. His men were loud, their boots trampling the soft earth. They led their horses to the water's edge, letting them drink and foul the sacred shallows. Nathan dismounted. His eyes, sharp and practiced, found the tracks immediately. He saw the small, elegant boot prints. He saw the tracks of her mare, and intertwined with them, like a snake in her path, were the prints of a man's moccasins. He followed the trail. He saw where she had stood by the rock, where her clothes had likely been. He saw the warrior's tracks in the willow line, where he had watched. A vulgar, infuriating narrative built itself in his mind. The savage had not just seen her, he had watched her. A black raven landed on a dead branch across the water, its call a mocking caw. Nathan drew his service revolver. The motion was smooth, economical. He took aim. He fired. The explosion was deafening in the peaceful canyon. The raven dissolved in a puff of black feathers. The gunshot echoed, slapping against the rock walls. A sound of absolute, disruptive power. A small, brass casing ejected from the revolver, spinning in the air before landing in the soft mud near the water's edge. "No sign of a camp, Captain," his sergeant reported, spitting tobacco. "Just one set of tracks." "It does not matter," Nathan said, his voice quiet and cold. He holstered his pistol. "They know we were here. That is the point." He looked at the trampled mud, the horse droppings floating in the clear water, the dead bird. "Let us ride." 2 days later, Lone Hawk returned. He could not stay away. The memory of the woman, the impossible omen, pulled him back. He came over the same ridge, his pony stepping softly. He smelled the camp before he saw it, the sour, acrid stench of stale cigar smoke. He dismounted, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He saw the churned mud. He saw the dozens of boot prints, the deep, steel-shod tracks of the cavalry horses. They had been everywhere. They had shown no respect. He walked to the willow line, where he had stood. They had been there, too. They had followed the tracks. They knew. He knelt by the water, his eyes scanning, reading the story of the violation. He saw the discarded cigar butts. He saw the deep, angry marks of boots stomping out a small fire. And then he saw it. Glinting in the sun, half buried in the mud, was the small brass cylinder. He picked it up. It was still shiny. He had seen these before, the leaves of the soldiers' rifles. This one was small, from a handgun. He held the brass casing in his palm. It was a message, a promise. This was the white man's answer to his mercy. He had let the woman go, and this was their reply. He returned to the village in a dark mood. The image of the brass casing, the smell of the smoke, had eclipsed the memory of the woman. Or rather, they had merged. She was the beginning. This was the continuation. Buffalo Horn and 2 other young warriors were polishing their rifles by the fire. They saw him approach and saw the thunder on his face. "What is it, Hawk?" Buffalo Horn called out, his voice laced with a teasing challenge. "You have been walking in a cloud for 2 days. Did you see a ghost in the sacred water?" Lone Hawk did not answer. He stalked past them, his hands clenched. His distraction was becoming a weakness, and they could all see it. His uncle, Red Elk, watched him from the opening of his lodge. He had seen Hawk leave. He saw him return. He had watched his nephew wrestle with this new spirit for 2 days. That night, by the fire, he finally spoke. "You are a poor hunter, nephew," Red Elk said, his voice low. "You hunt, but you bring nothing back. You sit with us, but your spirit is on the plain. You saw more than the white man's wagon tracks. What did you see?" Hawk stared into the flames. He was a warrior. He was a scout. He was not a boy to be addled by a... What? A vision. He could not betray the moment. He could not speak of her nakedness, but he had to speak. He looked at his uncle, his face hard. "I saw the woman." Red Elk's hand, which was reaching for a piece of dried meat, froze. What woman? The woman from the story, Hawk said, his voice tight. A white woman. She was at the lake. Red Elk's face became granite. At the lake or in it? Hawk met his uncle's gaze. In it. A long, terrible silence stretched between them. Red Elk's eyes were dark and angry. She desecrated the water that speaks of the sky. She was a spy, and you— I did not know what to do, Hawk admitted, his own anger rising to meet his uncle's. She was alone. She was afraid. I let her go. Red Elk's anger was a cold thing. You let her go. She is the omen. She is the forerunner of their army. You should have taken her. You should have killed her. She was an unarmed woman, Hawk shot back, his voice rising. She was not a soldier. She is worse than a soldier, Red Elk said, his voice a low growl. He stood up, pacing in the firelight. She is the excuse. She is the reason they will give. You let her go, and now they have come. Hawk stood as well. What do you mean? The cavalry, 12 riders. They came to the lake yesterday. They fouled the water. They left their soldier magic. He was almost shouting now. You did not kill her. You did not take her. You did not even touch her. You, a Comanche warrior, found a white woman alone and— What? You turned your back. Hawk did not answer. The truth of the words stung him. Red Elk stopped pacing. He stared at his nephew, and the anger in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by a deep, weary confusion. This is not the way of our fathers. This is new. He sat down heavily. This is a bad sign. Lone Hawk, you were soft when you should have been hard, and now they will be hard. Their punishment for your mercy will be a fire we cannot put out. That same evening, at the Hart Ranch, Evie fastened the last button of her dress. It was a high-necked, modest calico, the best she had. Her father had insisted she look proper. Captain Crowell was coming to dinner. He arrived as the sun was setting, a tall, imposing figure in his dark blue uniform, 2 troopers flanking him like honor guards. He dismounted, and Evie felt her father's nervous energy as he rushed to greet him. Captain, welcome. Welcome to our humble home. Nathan Crowell removed his hat. His hair was thick and dark, his features perfectly chiseled. He was, Evie had to admit, an incredibly handsome man. Mr. Hart. He then turned to Evie, his blue eyes sweeping over her. He took her hand. His own was cool and dry, and he bowed. Miss Hart, Evelyn, a true pleasure. I am relieved to see you have arrived safely. His voice was like his eyes, polished, correct, and cold. He was assessing her, from the part in her hair to the scuffed toes of her boots. I was deeply concerned, he continued, to hear of your frightful encounter. You must understand. This land is not Boston. It is not civilized. It is populated by savages, brutes who have no concept of honor or decency. Evie flinched at the word. Savages. The man at the lake. His eyes had not been brutal. They had been embarrassed. I was foolish to wonder, Captain. Reckless, he corrected her, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. But you are safe now. That is what matters. Another rider approached, this one on a fine chestnut gelding. He was not a soldier. He wore a dark, well-cut suit. Ah, Silas, her father said, his voice even more strained. You are just in time. Silas Kane dismounted, his movement smooth, and bowed over Evie's hand. Miss Hart, an honor. You bring light to this desolate place. He turned immediately to her father. Thomas, Captain, shall we discuss our small matter of business before we impose on the ladies' evening? The 3 men disappeared into her father's small study, closing the door. Evie was left standing in the main room, feeling like a dismissed child. She went to the sideboard, ostensibly to pour water, but she stood close to the thin wooden door. She could hear their voices, muffled but clear. Silas Kane's voice was smooth. "The railroad is the future, Thomas, and the railroad needs water. That lake is the key." "But that land," her father's voice was weak. "It is their sacred ground. Silas, the Comanche." "The Comanche," Nathan's voice cut in, "will be gone. That is my business. Your business. Thomas, is this—" Evie heard the sound of paper unfolding. "A rather large note, past due," Kane said, his voice losing its polite edge. "But the railroad is prepared to be generous. We need a right-of-way. We need surveying permission. You sign these and your debt is managed. Your land value will, in fact, triple. Refuse." The silence that followed was heavy. "This is not just business, Thomas," Nathan said. "It is about progress. Taming this land for our own people. We cannot allow a few superstitious primitives to stand in the way of American destiny. Your cooperation is a matter of loyalty." Evie backed away from the door, her stomach churning. The lake, her lake, the one from her encounter. It was the watering station. They were planning to take it. They were using her father's debt to force him to help. And Nathan, he spoke of clearing the primitives, as if he were talking about clearing brush. A few nights later, the shout came, "Fire in the valley." They ran outside, on the horizon, 2 or 3 miles away. A bright orange glow lit up the night sky. A settler's cabin, engulfed in flames. As if on cue, Nathan and his patrol rode up, their horses sweating. His face was grim in the firelight. "Comanche," he said, his voice a sharp crack in the night. "It has all their markings. This is what I was warning you about. Thomas, this is the savagery we are up against. They use that lake as a staging ground. This proves it. We must move on. Now." Evie looked at the distant fire, then at her fiancé's hard, righteous face. She felt a cold knot of doubt. Was it Comanche, or was it just convenient? She looked at her father, who was wringing his hands, his face pale with fear. She looked at Nathan, so handsome, so sure of his destiny. And she thought of the man by the water, the man who had warned her, the man who had turned his back. She was trapped, her duty to her father, her betrothal to this powerful man, her very place in this new, civilized world. All of it depended on her believing their story. But she could not. She was beginning to realize that the world was not divided into civilized and savage. It was divided into those who had power and those who did not. And she, in her own way, was as much a prisoner as the people they planned to clear. The burning of the settler's cabin hung over the small ranch like a pall of smoke. Nathan used the incident to justify a constant, armed presence. Troopers were everywhere, riding patrols, stopping at the ranch for water. Their jangling spurs and loud voices a constant reminder that the land was now under military scrutiny. Evie felt trapped, not by the alleged Comanche threat, but by the very men who were supposed to be her protectors. A week passed. The memory of the lake, of the man, haunted her. It was not just the fear and the shame. It was his eyes, the seriousness, the confusion, and the simple, inexplicable fact that he had turned his back. She had to go back. The thought was madness. It was a betrayal of her father, her fiancé, her race. But the doubt planted in her mind by that fire, the overheard conversation in her father's study, it all coalesced into one burning question. She had to see the lake again, to know if it was truly the savage staging ground Nathan described, or if it was just what it had seemed, a quiet, sacred place. She made an excuse. She told her father she needed to ride, to get used to the land, that she was suffocating in the house. He was so distracted by his own worries, by the papers from Silas Kane that now sat on his desk, that he barely registered her words. He just nodded, his eyes distant and afraid. She did not ride her own mare. She took a smaller, quicker pony from the corral, telling herself it was less conspicuous. She carried a small bundle, a towel, a bar of lye soap, a fresh chemise. She told herself it was in case she wanted to wash her face and hands. It was a lie, but it was a comfort. She rode a wide, looping circuit, avoiding the main trails, keeping to the low arroyos. It took her almost 2 hours. When she finally reached the gap in the rocks, her heart was a drum against her ribs. She dismounted and led the pony down. The lake was just as she remembered. Still perfect. The water was a sheet of turquoise glass. There was no sign of war, no sign of soldiers, though she saw the churned mud at the far end. The place Nathan's men had fouled, but here, on this side, it was untouched. She walked to the flat rock. Her rock. She did not undress. She did not even untie the bundle. The idea of bathing here again felt like a second sacrilege, a betrayal of the man who had warned her away. She was the invader, not him. She sat on the rock for a long time, just looking at the water. She thought of the word he had used, war. She fumbled at the collar of her dress. Tucked into the bodice, for a bit of color, had been a simple strip of blue silk ribbon, a remnant from a Boston hat. It was the only fine, delicate thing she had left. On impulse, she pulled it out. The silk was bright against her dusty, calloused hands. It was a stupid gesture, a child's offering, but she needed to leave something, not as a mark, but as an apology. She laid the small, bright blue ribbon on the center of the rock. She weighed it down with a smooth white pebble. Then she turned, mounted her pony, and rode away, her heart feeling inexplicably lighter and heavier than before. From a vantage point high on the opposite rim, hidden in a cleft of rock so deep it was pure shadow, Lone Hawk watched her. He had been watching for an hour. He had seen her ride up, his stomach tightening, his hand going to his knife. He had watched her sit. He had watched her not swim. He had seen her place the small, bright object on the stone. He had watched her ride away. He waited until she was a small, fading speck in the dust. He waited another 30 minutes after that. Only then did he descend. He moved with the silence of a hunting cat. He went to the rock. He looked at the offering, a strip of blue cloth, smoother and shinier than any trade cloth he had ever seen. It was the color of a mountain flower, the color of the deep water. He picked it up. It was so light it felt like nothing in his hand. He rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. The texture was strange, cool and soft. He looked at the white pebble she had used to hold it down. A sign of peace, an apology, a trick. He did not understand, but he did not throw it away. He tucked the small ribbon into the leather pouch at his belt, the one that held his fire-starting kit and 2 lucky eagle feathers. He felt the silk against his knuckles as he tied the pouch. A small, strange, secret warmth. She went back 3 days later. He was there. She did not see him at first. She went to the rock, saw the ribbon was gone. Her heart sank. He had thrown it away. Disgusted. She sat, feeling foolish. "It is a strange gift," a low voice said. She gasped and spun around, her hand flying to her throat. He was not in the trees. He was sitting on a rock 20 feet away, as still as if he had been there all day. He was not in shadow this time. He was in the full, hot sunlight, and she could see him clearly. He was dressed as before, in moccasins and a buckskin breechcloth. A knife was sheathed at his hip. His black hair was held back by a simple leather band. He was watching her, his face serious, unsmiling. "You speak English," she said, her voice a thin whisper. "A little." He held up the blue ribbon. Why?" I am sorry," she stammered. "For the lake, before, I did not know it was sacred." He considered this. He looked at the ribbon in his hand, then at her. "It is sacred water, not for that." He did not say the word, bathing. "I will not do it again," she said quickly. She pointed at the churned mud at the far end. "The soldiers, they were here." His face hardened. I know. They left their sign. He thought of the brass casing. She did not know what to say. She wanted to run, but she also wanted to stay. She pointed to the ground. She found a sharp stick and drew in the damp sand. She drew a wavy line. "Water," she said. He watched her. He stood up. A single, fluid motion. He was taller than she had realized. He walked over, his feet silent on the sand. He looked at her drawing. He pointed at the lake. "Pa, pa," she repeated, the sound foreign on her tongue. He nodded. A short, serious gesture. She drew a small, square house with a chimney. "Home." He looked at the drawing. A strange, boxy shape. He did not understand it. He pointed in the direction of his village, a place she could not see. "TSA, my home." She looked at him, then back at her drawing. She slowly, deliberately, rubbed the house out with her boot. Then she drew a rifle. Beside it, she drew a bow and arrow. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. "War." He stared at the drawings. Rifle, bow. He understood this. He pointed at the rifle. "Your people." He pointed at the bow. "My people." Then he drew a large X over both drawings, crossing them out. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "No, this war." It was the start. They met again. Not by plan, but by a shared, unspoken orbit that drew them both to the lake. The meetings were short, always in the bright light of midday, always with a distance between them. She would bring a piece of bread, or an apple. He would show her how to read the clouds, which plants held water. He learned her name, Evie. It felt strange in his mouth. She learned this. Lone Hawk. The wall of savage and civilized began to dissolve, word by word, gesture by gesture. She saw that he was not a brute. He was quiet and watchful, and had a sudden, rare smile that lit his entire face when she pronounced a Comanche word correctly. He saw that she was not the arrogant, dismissive white woman he had imagined. She was curious. She was brave to come here. And she seemed lonely, as lonely as he was. They held themselves back. This was a dangerous game, and they both knew it. This was not a friendship. It could not be. It was just a breathing space. A moment of quiet in the middle of the war he had spoken of. One afternoon, a small rainstorm had passed, leaving the rocks slick. Evie was tracing the edge of the water, pointing to a hawk circling high overhead, trying to ask if it was his namesake. "Is that—" she began, turning to him. Her foot slipped on a patch of wet, green algae on the stone. She cried out, her arms windmilling, and she fell backward, toward the deep edge of the lake. He moved before he thought. He was 3 yards away, but in one explosive lunge, he was there. He did not grab her. He caught her. His hand shot out, grasping her arm just above the elbow. His other arm wrapped around her waist, catching her, pulling her back from the edge. They stumbled together, his momentum carrying them both, and they slammed into the trunk of a large cottonwood tree. The world stopped. Evie was pressed against him. Her hands were flat on his chest, which was bare, warm, and hard with muscle. She could feel his heart, hammering as fast as her own. She was breathing in the scent of him. Not dirt, as she might have expected, but sun and leather and pine and a clean, male scent that was uniquely his. He was holding her. His hand on her arm was a band of steel. The arm around her waist held her so tightly she could not breathe. He was looking down at her, not with anger, but with a kind of stunned, profound shock. He could feel the warmth of her through the thin cotton of her dress. He could feel the soft curve of her back under his palm. Her hair had come loose, and one strand touched his cheek. They were a breath apart. Her blue-gray eyes were wide, her lips parted. He let her go. He dropped his arms and stepped back so quickly he almost tripped himself. He turned away from her, running a hand over his face, his skin burning. Evie sagged against the tree, her legs trembling. The brief, solid contact had shaken her to her core. It was not a violent touch. It was a strong touch, a saving touch. And it was more intimate than any of the polite, gloved handshakes she had ever received in Boston. They both stood, their backs to each other, for a long, silent moment. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaves. You caught me," she finally whispered to the tree bark. He nodded, his back still to her. "The rocks are slick." When he finally turned around, his face was the impassive mask of the warrior again. But his eyes were not. His eyes were dark and troubled, and held a fire she had not seen before. That night, the quiet dam between them had broken, and the stories came, just small pieces. He told her, in his halting English, of learning to ride. "Not run," he said, meaning walking. "Ride. I ride before I run. My brother. He was older. He was fast. He taught me." "Where is he?" she asked. Hawk's face went flat. "Dead. Soldiers. Blue coats. Like your man." The word hit her. "Your man, Nathan." "He is not my man," she said, too quickly. "He is my father's choice." And she told him about Boston, about the dances, the suffocating rooms, the endless talk of money and land. "They looked at me like a horse," she said, the realization hitting her as she said it. A good mare, good for breeding, good for a good match." He did not understand all the words, but he understood the bitterness in her voice. He understood horse. He understood match. He knew of the white man's strange bargains. They looked at each other, two people from different worlds, trapped in the stories others had written for them. What if the question hung in the air, unspoken? What if he was not a savage and she was not a lady? What if they were just a man and a woman? But they were not. The world was too loud, too close. If he was caught here, with her, he would be shot as a spy. If she was caught with him, she would be ruined, cast out, her name a dirty word in the mouths of the settlers. Or worse. Nathan would take it as a personal insult, and he would marry her immediately, lock her away, just to prove his ownership. The pressure was building. Not just at the lake. Nathan Crowell was not a fool. He had been visiting the Hart Ranch 3 times a week, a model of the concerned fiancé. He brought Evie small gifts, a tin of tinned peaches, a ribbon he had ordered from St. Louis, but his eyes were watchful. He noticed her distraction, as he called it. He noticed she was cool to his touch, that she flinched when he put his hand on her arm. He saw her riding out, and his displeasure was clear. "Evelyn," he said one evening, on the porch, his voice perfectly reasonable. "A lady of your station should not be riding alone. It is not safe. It is not proper. Your place is here, at the ranch, preparing for our life." "Preparing how, Captain?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "By learning to be afraid of shadows." His face tightened. "By learning your duty. A woman's duty is to her husband, to her home. We are building a civilization here. Evelyn, it requires sacrifice. It requires order. Your behavior, your wandering, it is disorderly." He was lecturing her, as if she were a new recruit. A good wife must stand beside her husband in this war to civilize the West. "The war, it was always the war." Meanwhile, her father was crumbling. Silas Kane had visited again, this time without the pretense of a social call. He and Thomas Hart were in the study for an hour. When Kane left, her father did not come out. Evie went to the study. He was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. The papers were spread out before him. A pen was on the desk. "Papa?" Thomas Hart looked up. His eyes were bloodshot.
He has me, Evie. He has us.
The debt. The survey. He wants me to sign, to give his crews permission to survey the land. Around the lake, he says it is just a formality, that the railroad has the right of way, but it feels wrong. It feels like I am painting a target on our backs. He was shaking. He was afraid of the Comanche. He was terrified of Silas Kane. Evie watched as her father, a man she had always seen as strong, picked up the pen. His hand was trembling so violently that he could not sign. He dropped the pen, and it rolled onto the floor, spattering a small, black star of ink on the raw pine boards. He stared at it, a broken man. The two currents, the secret, forbidden tenderness at the lake, and the cold, relentless pressure of the railroad, were flowing parallel, and Evie's heart was trapped between them, the land threatening to give way beneath her feet. Nathan Crowell needed a victory. He had the fire at the settler's cabin, a flimsy excuse, but an excuse nonetheless. A local rancher had also reported 2 cows missing, and it was simple, almost lazy, to blame the savages who lived by the lake. He gathered a force of 30 men, not a patrol, but a punitive expedition. He did not move in the broad light of day. He waited until the moon was a sliver, a cold, curved knife in the sky. He led his men on a hard, fast ride, not toward the main Comanche village, which he was too smart to attack, but toward a small, outlying hunting camp red elk sometimes used. He had been given its location by a captured Comanchero weeks before. He told his men they were going to retrieve stolen property and send a message. They hit the camp an hour before dawn. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Nathan fired the first shot, a warning shot, he would call it in his report, directly into a lodge. The camp exploded in chaos. Sleepy men, women, children, stumbling out into the dark, met by a volley of rifle fire. The soldiers, drunk on adrenaline and the righteousness Nathan had fed them, fired at anything that moved. It was over in 10 minutes. When the sun came up, it illuminated a scene from a nightmare. The lodges were burning. 2 old men and a woman lay dead. Several others were wounded, their moans a thin, terrible sound in the sudden silence. Nathan ordered his men to round up the few ponies. He found no stolen cattle. He planted a skinning knife he claimed was from the burned cabin. "Proof," he declared to his sergeant, who just spat and looked away. Lone Hawk was on his way back from a 3-day scouting mission. He, along with Buffalo Horn and 2 others, had been watching the railroad survey crews from a distance. They saw the pillar of smoke first, from 5 miles away. It was coming from the wrong direction. It was coming from the hunting camp. A cold dread, heavier than any fear he had ever known, seized him. He kicked his pony into a desperate, lathering gallop. He left the other warriors behind. He rode into the camp, or what was left of it. The soldiers were gone. He smelled the smoke, the copper tang of blood, and the stench of burned hide. He saw the bodies. He saw the women weeping, tearing at their hair. He found his uncle, Red Elk, standing over a small form, his face a mask of grief so profound it was terrifying. Hawk slid from his pony, his legs weak. It was his cousin, a small girl, only 8 summers old. Her name was Little Fawn. She had been his shadow as a child, following him everywhere, begging for rides on his pony. She was lying on a buffalo robe, her small chest ragged from a rifle bullet. She was still breathing. Barely. "Blue coats," Red Elk said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He did not look at Hawk. He could not. "They came in the dark, like cowards. They shot the lodges." Hawk knelt. Little Fawn's eyes flickered open. She saw him. A small, bloody bubble formed on her lips. She tried to say his name. He touched her forehead. His hand, a warrior's hand. Impossibly gentle. He felt the life in her. A small, fluttering bird. And he felt it leaving. She is... He could not say it. "She is dying," Red Elk said, his voice breaking. "For 2 cows, for a piece of iron track." a rage. So pure and so cold it was white-hot. Filled Lone Hawk. It was not the hot, quick anger of buffalo horn. It was a deep, killing rage, the kind that settles in the bones. He had let the woman go. He had shown mercy. And this was the payment. His uncle had been right. He stayed with Little Fawn until she died. Just as the sun touched the top of the canyon, he carried her small, light body himself. He helped his uncle wrap her for the journey. That night, the village was a place of mourning. The cries of the women chilled the air. The men were silent, their faces painted black. Buffalo Horn was demanding war. He was demanding they ride on the fort itself. Red Elk sat by the fire, his spirit broken. He listened to the hot words, and then he stood. He was not a grieving old man. He was a war chief. "We will have blood," he said, his voice cutting through the wails. "We will make them pay. We will strike the iron horse. We will burn their wagons." He looked around the circle, his eyes falling on Lone Hawk. "But we are not fools. We will not ride into their guns. We will be the hawk, not the buffalo. We will strike and fade." He then looked directly at his nephew. "But first, you, Lone Hawk, your spirit is tangled. You are tied to this. You let the omen go. You will go back to the sacred water. The soldiers will come there. The railroad man will come there. It is the heart of this. You will watch. You will be my eyes. Do not be seen. Do not be soft. When the time comes to strike, you will strike." It was a command, and it was a punishment. He was being sent to watch the place that had started all this, the place of his softness, while his cousin's body was still warm. In the town of Dry Mesa, Evie Hart listened to the talk. The battle at the Comanche camp was the only thing anyone spoke of. She heard it first at the general store, where she and her father had gone for supplies. "Heard the captain give 'em hell," one man, a freighter, said, biting the end off a cigar. "Rode right into their nest, scattered 'em, killed a dozen bucks, from what I hear." "Serves 'em right," the storekeep said, weighing out flour. "After burning out the millers. Good riddance." That evening, Nathan came to the ranch. He was in his dress uniform, and he accepted a glass of her father's whiskey. He was in a fine, expansive mood. He was the hero of the hour. "It was a sharp engagement, Thomas," he said, holding his glass to the lamplight. "But necessary. One cannot show weakness to a savage. You must meet his brutality with overwhelming force. It is the only language he understands." Evie sat in the corner, her hands clenched in her lap. Were there women?" she asked, her voice small. Nathan glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Evelyn, war is not a dinner party topic. They were hostiles." "But were they?" She pressed an image of Hawk's serious face in her mind. "They were," Nathan said, his voice flat and final. "The matter is closed. The region is safer tonight because of what my men did. You, of all people, should be grateful." She felt sick. She thought of Hawk's words. Dead, soldiers, blue coats. She looked at the handsome man who was to be her husband, this celebrated hero, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She saw the man who had shot the raven. A week later, her father had to go to Dry Mesa for a meeting with the land agent. Silas Kane had called the meeting, and his summons was not one Thomas Hart could ignore. It was late afternoon when they finished, and the sun was already low. Evie had come with him, desperate for any reason to escape the ranch, but she now regretted it. The ride home was 10 miles. "We must hurry, Papa," she said, as he helped her into the buckboard wagon. "It will be fine, Evie. We have a good moon," he said, but his voice was strained. He climbed up, taking the reins, and clucked to the 2 horses. They were 3 miles from the ranch, in a narrow cut between 2 low mesas, when the world exploded. A shot, the crack of a rifle, deafening, echoing in the narrow space. One of their horses screamed, a terrible, high-pitched sound, and reared, collapsing in the harness. The wagon lurched, throwing Evie against the dashboard. "Get down!" her father yelled, his voice cracking. 3 men on horseback rode out from a rocky outcrop, blocking the trail. They were not Comanche. Evie knew that instantly. They were white men, their faces covered with dirty bandanas, their hats pulled low. They were rough, their clothes stained, and they all held rifles. "Well, well," the leader, a large man on a black horse, said, his voice a gravelly drawl. "Look what we got here. Boys, a gentleman, and a lady." "Take the horses," Thomas Hart said, his voice shaking, his hands held high. "Take the wagon. We have no money." "Oh, we will take the horses," the man said, laughing. He dismounted, walking slowly toward the wagon. "And we will take a look at your supplies, and," his eyes cold and assessing, "we will see what the lady has to offer." Evie felt a terror she had never known. This was not Nathan's savage threat. This was a greasy, leering, real-world evil. "Please," her father begged. "Leave her alone. She is—" The man backhanded him, a single, brutal motion that sent Thomas tumbling from the wagon seat into the dust. "Shut up, old man." The man turned to the wagon, his eyes fixed on Evie. He reached for her. "No!" she screamed, scrambling back over the sacks of flour. A sound, like a fast, hard thwack, cut the air. The man grunted. He stopped. He looked down. An arrow, fletched with a hawk's feather, was protruding from his chest. He looked up, his eyes wide with a stupid, profound surprise. He made a small gasping sound and fell, face first, into the dirt. "What in the—" one of the other men yelled. Another thwack. The second man slumped in his saddle, an arrow in his throat. The third man panicked. He raised his rifle and fired blindly into the shadows of the rocks. "Show yourself! You—" A figure on a paint pony, so fast it seemed to be part of the wind, burst from the rocks. It was not a savage. It was a warrior. He was naked to the waist, his body low over the pony's neck, his face a mask of cold fury. It was a hawk. He had a rifle, not a bow. He must have taken it from the first man. He rode straight at the third outlaw, who was fumbling to reload. Hawk fired. The outlaw was knocked from his saddle. It was over in 30 seconds. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. There was only the sound of the wind and the dying groans of the one horse, and Evie's own ragged, sobbing breaths. Hawk pulled his pony to a halt. He was breathing hard. He looked at the dead men. He looked at Thomas Hart, who was pushing himself up from the dust, his face white. Then he looked at Evie. Their eyes met. The man from the lake. The man who had held her. The man whose family had been murdered by her fiancé. He had just saved her life. Thomas Hart stared, his mouth open. Good God, you are—" Hawk did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Evie. He saw her terror, her shock. He saw her recognition. He slid from his pony, his knife in his hand. He did not approach them. He went to the dying horse. He spoke to it, a low, soft Comanche word. He cut its throat, a single, quick, merciful slash. The horse shuddered, and was still. He turned. He looked at the buckboard. "You cannot stay," he said, his English clipped, rough. "More will come."
"Our horse,"
Evie whispered. "Take theirs," Hawk said, gesturing to the outlaws' mounts. "Cut your other horse free. Ride." He was already moving, catching the reins of the outlaws' horses. He tied them to the back of the wagon. He took the one good horse from the harness, his knife slashing the leather. He tied it alongside the others. "Go," he said to Thomas. "Now." Thomas Hart, a man broken by debt and fear, looked at the Comanche warrior who had just saved him. We thank you," he stammered. I have no—" "Go!" Hawk yelled. And this time, it was a command that brooked no argument. He slapped the rump of the led horse. Thomas jolted into action, grabbed the reins. Evie was still frozen. Hawk looked at her. "Evie, go! Now!" He called her by her name. She scrambled onto the wagon seat. Thomas whipped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, dragging its one dead horse for a moment before the harness broke, rattling past the bodies of the dead men. Evie looked back. Lone Hawk was sitting on his pony, a dark silhouette against the deepening twilight, watching them go. He was surrounded by the death he had wrought for her. Then, as if he were a spirit, he turned his pony and melted back into the rocks, gone as if he had never been. They were halfway home when the sound of hooves came from behind. Evie's heart stopped. Not again. "Halt!" a voice cried. "In the name of the—" It was Nathan, he and his patrol, drawn by the distant sound of the shots. He rode up, his face a mask of confusion, taking in the single horse pulling the wagon, the cut harness. "Evelyn Thomas, what in God's name happened?" Thomas Hart, his voice shaking, told the story. "Outlaws, 3 of them. They killed a horse. They were... They were what?" Nathan pressed. Evie spoke, her voice flat. "They were going to rob us, and worse. But someone stopped them." "Stopped them?" Nathan looked around. "Who, where?" Evie looked at him, her fiancé, her protector, who was once again too late. "An Indian," she said, her voice clear in the night air. "A Comanche. He killed them. He saved us." Nathan's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dark, controlling anger. He looked back down the trail, where the bodies lay. He looked at Evie, her face pale, her eyes enormous in the moonlight. "A Comanche," he said, the word a sneer. "You were saved by a savage." He was not pleased. He was not relieved. He was furious. Someone else had been the hero, and a buck had saved his betrothed. It was like the incident at the lake, another stain on his honor, another mark of his property being touched by an inferior. The story spread through Dry Mesa like a grass fire. "Did you hear the Hart girl? Almost got herself scalped, but some tame buck saved her." It was twisted, of course, but the core of it remained Miss Evie. The captain's woman had been saved by a Comanche. Silas Kane heard the rumor and rode straight to the fort. He did not like this. Not at all. "This is a disaster," Kane said, pacing Nathan's office. "This is not what we need. People are starting to say that Comanche is a hero. They are sympathizing. You cannot build a railroad through land that is defended by noble savages. You must make them monsters." "He killed 3 men," Nathan said, his voice tight. "He killed 3 outlaws," Kane snapped. "That is not a crime. It is a public service. We need to change this story. We need to remind these people what a savage is. We need another incident, a real one that cannot be mistaken." "I am listening," Nathan said, his eyes cold. The next time Evie went to the lake, she was shaking. She did not know if he would be there. She did not know what she would say. He was there. He was waiting. She ran to him. She did not think. She did not care about propriety. She ran the last few feet and grabbed his arm. It was the arm she had touched before, hard and warm. "You are alive?" she whispered. I thought—" He did not pull away. He looked down at her hand on his skin. He saw the terror that was still in her eyes. "I am alive." "You saved us," she said, tears welling. "You saved my father. You saved me." "They were bad men," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "They would have—" She could not say it. She looked up at him, her face full of gratitude and terror and a confusion so profound it choked her. "Thank you. Hawk, thank you." She was standing close, too close. He could smell the lye soap on her skin, the clean scent of her hair. He saw the pulse beating in her throat. His hand came up, on its own. He did not mean to. His fingers, calloused and rough, brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His thumb grazed her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, a small sob escaping her. This was it, the moment, the precipice. He leaned in. He could feel her breath. He could taste the dust and the fear on her lips. It was a kiss that was about to happen, a kiss that would end both of them. He pulled back. He dropped his hand as if her skin were on fire. He stepped away, putting a yard of cool air between them. She opened her eyes, confused, hurt. "Evie," he said, his voice harsh. "You cannot be here." "But No." He turned his back to her, just as he had done the first day. It was the only way he could think. "Your man, the captain, he killed little Fawn." "What, who?" "My cousin, a girl, 8 years old." His voice was flat, dead. "His victory, his battle. He shot her. You are his—" "No," she whispered. "I am not. I did not know." "It does not matter," he said, turning to face her. His face was a mask of grief and anger. "You are white. I am Comanche. You go. Do not come back. The next time we meet, I will not be this." He was pushing her away. He was saving her. He was saving himself. "If they see you with me," he said, his voice low and desperate, "they will destroy you. If my people see me with you, they will say I am a traitor. There is no there is no water between us. There is only war. The war I told you about. It is here." He watched her, his heart breaking. As her face crumpled, he saw the tears finally come, hot and real. She understood. He watched her run to her pony, her shoulders shaking. He watched her ride away. And this time, he knew he had done the right thing. The warrior had finally won. But as he watched her disappear, he clutched the small, silk ribbon in the pouch at his belt, and it felt like it was burning a hole through his skin. Silas Kane was a patient man. He understood that progress, like a river, could be dammed for a time, but it would always find a way through. The rumor of the hero Comanche was a snag in the water, a temporary, annoying blockage. His investment was too large, his timetable too strict. To be derailed by sentiment, he needed to change the water's course. He needed a flood. He did not trust Nathan Crowell to handle it. The captain was a useful tool, but he was driven by ego and a childish, brittle sense of honor. Silas Kane was driven by mathematics. He needed to subtract public sympathy from the Comanche and add it to his own column. The equation was simple. He needed a fresh, undeniable atrocity, and he needed a victim everyone could pity. He found his instruments in a dusty cantina in Dry Mesa. 2 days later, they were not Comanche. They were not even from the territory. They were Comancheros. 2 men, a breed of outcast, belonging to no tribe and no nation, loyal only to the silver dollar. He met them in a back room that smelled of stale beer and desperation. "I am not paying you to think," Silas said, sliding a small, heavy leather pouch across the table. "I am paying you to follow instructions. You will not be seen." The larger of the two, a man with a scarred face and one milky eye, hefted the pouch. "A fire is a fire. Mister, what is the difference?" "The difference," Kane said, his voice smooth and cold, "is in the details. You will not just burn the barn. You will burn the grain, all of it. The seed for next year. It must be a total loss." He pushed a small object, wrapped in cloth, across the table. "You will leave this." The man unwrapped it. It was an arrowhead, a distinctive, jagged piece of dark flint. "It is an old Comanche marker," Kane said, "and you will use your moccasins. You will leave tracks, messy ones, as if you were in a hurry. You will be in and out before the moon is high. Understood?" The man grinned, showing broken teeth. "We understand, mister. We smoke a lot, just like the Indians." That night, Evie woke up choking. The air in her small room was thick, not with dust, but with acrid, biting smoke. She heard a sound, a low, terrible roar, like a giant, angry beast, and under it, her father's voice, not yelling, but screaming her name. "Evelyn Fire, get out the barn!" She ran out into the yard, pulling a shawl over her nightgown. The night was gone. The entire sky was a sickening, churning orange. The large grain barn, the one that held their seed, their tools, and the last of their harvested corn, was a volcano of flame. The heat was so intense it seared her face from 50 yards away. Sparks, like a swarm of angry stars, rose into the sky, and she could feel the heat through the soles of her thin slippers. Her father was standing there, a silhouette against the inferno, holding an empty water bucket. He was completely still. He was watching his entire future, his entire reason for being in this God-forsaken land, turn to ash. By the time the flames died down, just as a gray, washed-out dawn began to break, Nathan Crowell arrived. He was at the head of a small, 4-man patrol, as if he had been on a routine ride. Evie watched him, a cold, hard knot of suspicion in her stomach. He had arrived just a little too quickly. "Thomas, my God, man," Nathan said, his voice a perfect blend of shock and military authority. He dismounted, his face a mask of grim concern. This is a catastrophe." "It is gone," Thomas Hart whispered, his face covered in soot, his eyes vacant. "Everything, the seed, it is all gone." "This was no accident," Nathan said, his voice hardening. He was not speaking to Thomas. He was speaking to his men, to the ranch hands, to Evie. He was performing. He began to walk the perimeter, his eyes scanning the ground. "They have grown bold. They have—" He stopped, kneeling in the mud near the burned-out foundation. "What is it, Captain?" his sergeant asked. Right on cue. Nathan stood up, holding something in his gauntlet. It was the arrowhead. "This," he said, his voice a low growl. "A Comanche war arrow. This is their signature." He pointed. "And look, tracks, moccasins. They were here. The filthy animals. They did this." He looked at Thomas, his eyes full of righteous, calculated fury. "This is what I warned you about. Thomas, this is the price of their savagery. They burn a white man's living, a man who has shown them nothing but civility." He turned to his sergeant. Ride to the fort. Send a message to the Territorial Command. I am reporting a direct, unprovoked act of war on a civilian homestead. I am requesting full authorization to move on the source of this infection, to clear the lake, for good." As the sergeant galloped away, Silas Kane rode up, his timing as perfect as Nathan's. He was not dressed for an emergency. He was in his town suit. He took in the smoking ruin of the barn, the broken figure of Thomas Hart, and the commanding, angry presence of the captain. "Thomas," Silas said, shaking his head, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is, words fail me, a terrible, terrible blow." Thomas Hart just looked at him, his eyes dead. "You have lost everything," Silas continued, his voice soft, reasonable. "Your winter grain, your seed. You are ruined, man, utterly ruined." He put a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Thank God you still have friends." He walked Thomas into the house, past Evie, who stood frozen by the porch, an invisible ghost at her own father's execution. Nathan followed them in. Through the open door, Evie could hear the murmur of voices. She finally moved, her feet like lead, and stood just outside the door, in the shadow. "Thomas, you cannot recover from this," Silas was saying. "Not alone, but you do not have to." Evie heard the crinkle of paper. "The railroad. We are prepared to be compassionate. We will absorb your debt, all of it. That note you hold, it vanishes."
"Silas,
Her father's voice was a croak. "And more, as a gesture of Partnership. A cash payment, $10,000. Enough to rebuild, to buy new seeds, to hire new men. 10,000. Thomas was stunned. All we require, Silas said, his voice as smooth as oiled steel, is your signature. This small matter of the land, the right-of-way for the survey. A small price to pay for your complete salvation. Is it not? It is not just salvation. Thomas, Nathan's voice cut in, hard and righteous. It is justice. Sign the paper. Give us the civilian authority we need. Let us move on to these animals. Let us build our railroad. Let us build our future. Or let the savages burn it down. The choice is yours. Evie heard the sound of the pen being dipped in the inkwell. No. The word was quiet, but it cut through the room. Evie stepped out of the shadow and into the doorway. All three men turned to look at her. Her nightgown was stained with soot. Her hair was wild. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning. Evelyn, this is not a place for you, Nathan said, his voice sharp with annoyance. You are hysterical. No, she said again, walking to stand beside her father's chair. She put her hand on his shoulder. I am not hysterical, and I am not a fool. Papa, do not sign. Evelyn, what are you saying? Her father whispered, confused. She looked at Nathan. You, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. This is a lie. This whole performance, it is a lie. Nathan's face went white. Miss Hart, you are unwell. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. Captain, she snapped. This evidence. She pointed to the arrowhead he had placed on the table. How convenient. Just like the cabin fire was convenient. Just like the stolen cows were convenient. Evelyn, her father was horrified. No, Papa, the only robbers I have met in this land were white men, the only savage I have met. He saved our lives. He saved us. From them, from men who looked just like... She trailed off, her implication clear. Nathan took a step toward her. His handsome face was a mask of cold, white rage. Silas Kane watched, his expression neutral, interested. How dare you? Nathan said, his voice a low, vicious hiss. He was not shouting. It was worse than shouting. You stand there in your disarray, and you shame me. You shame your father. You shame your race. He leaned in, his voice dropping so only she and her father could hear. Are you so bewitched by that redskin? Has he been visiting you? Has he put some of non-white spell on you, or is it simpler? Is that why you defend him? Because he has touched you? It was the ultimate violation. The accusation was so vile, so poisonous, it took her breath away. She did not slap him. Her response was colder, and it cut him deeper. You are disgusting, she said, her voice clear and steady. You are not a man of honor. You are a coward, and you are the savage. Captain, you and your greed and your lies. Nathan's face was stone. He stood up to his full height. My honor has been insulted. My betrothed is clearly ill, overwrought. He looked at Thomas Hart, his eyes like ice. Control your daughter, Thomas, or I will. You have until tomorrow to sign that paper, or your friend Silas and I. We may not be able to protect you from the next round of bad luck. He turned on his heel, his spurs ringing on the pine floor, and strode out. The news of the confrontation spread, as all bad news does. Nathan's version, of course, that the Hart girl had gone hysterical from the fire, that she was unwell, that she was spouting nonsense. But the women in Dry Mesa, the wives of the other officers, the storekeep's wife, they had their own version. Evie went to town 2 days later for supplies. The women she had nodded to before, they now turned away. They gathered in small, whispering clutches, their eyes following her. Hysterical, she heard one say. Poor thing. I heard, another whispered, that she consorts with the Comanche, that he is the one who saved her. Scandalous. She has gone native. She was an outcast. She had lost her place, her safety net, her future as a good wife, and in a strange, terrifying way, she had never felt so free. In the Comanche camp, Hawk's scouts had seen the smoke from the heart barn. They reported it. They burned their own, one said, confused. Then, 2 days later, the real report came. A scout, his pony lathered, rode in. Soldiers, many, wagons of ammunition. They are gathering at the fort. They are not riding out on patrol. They are gathering for a war party. The council fire that night was grim. Red Elk stared into the flames, his face a map of sorrow. It is as we feared. The fire, it was their excuse. They will come to the lake. They will come to kill us all. Buffalo Horn leaped to his feet, his tomahawk in his hand. Good, let them come. We will not wait for them. We will ride now. We will strike the fort itself. We will show them Comanche fire. A roar of approval went up from the younger warriors. No. Hawk's voice cut through the noise. He stood. That is what they want. It is a trap. What? Buffalo Horn spat. They are not fools. They know we are warriors. They want us to ride out. They want us on the open plain, where their big guns, their soldier guns, can cut us down. The fire. It was bait. They are waiting for us to take it. Buffalo Horn stalked over to him, his face inches from Hawk's. How do you know so much? Do you read their talking strings, or did your white woman tell you? The insult was open, public. You are soft. Lone Hawk, your heart is weak. You care more for that pale-faced woman than for your people. You are a traitor. Hawk did not hesitate. He hit him, a single bone-jarring punch to the jaw. Buffalo Horn staggered, then roared and lunged. They fell, a tangle of limbs, rolling in the dust by the fire. Enough! Red Elk's voice was the roar of a mountain lion. He was on his feet, his old war lance in his hand. Its butt slammed on the hard earth. The two young men froze, their hands at each other's throats. Red Elk looked at Hawk, his eyes full of a deep, profound sorrow. He is wrong to call you a traitor. His words are wind and poison, but they have a sting because they are close to a truth. Hawk stood, breathing hard, the shame burning him. You are not soft, Red Elk continued, but your path is clouded by this woman. We are at the end. If we fight, we die in their trap. If we run, we die in the winter, for we have nowhere to go. You speak against fighting. What is your other way, wise nephew? The silence stretched. Hawk had no answer. Evie knew. She had gone to the fort, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to... What? To appeal to her fiancé she had been refused entry, not to his office, to the fort itself. Captain's orders. Ma'am, he is in a military planning session. He is not to be disturbed. But she had heard it. A trooper, one who pitied her, perhaps. He spoke to her as she was turned away. Ma'am, I should not say, but it is a full engagement. Dawn, 2 days from now. At the lake. They are not taking prisoners. Ma'am. A full engagement. Not taking prisoners. A massacre. She did not go home. She rode to the livery, pretending to buy feed. And she waited until full dark. She stole out of the settlement, her heart a cold, terrified knot. She was riding to the lake. She was riding to him. She knew he had told her not to come. She knew it was war. She did not care. The lake was a pool of black ink under a starless sky. She was terrified. Hawk, she whispered, her voice a dry croak. Hawk. He came from the shadows. An explosion of motion. His hand was over her mouth before she could scream. He pulled her from the saddle, his other arm a band of iron around her waist. He dragged her, stumbling, behind a large screen of boulders. I told you not to come, he hissed, his voice a raw, angry whisper against her ear. He was shaking. You are a fool. My scouts are everywhere. They would have put an arrow in you before you reached the water. I do not care, she sobbed, turning in his grip, clinging to the front of his buckskin shirt. I do not care. Nathan, he is coming. 2 days. At dawn. He is bringing all of them. All the soldiers. It is a slaughter. He said, no prisoners. Hawk, he is coming to kill you all. He froze. His anger, his fear for her, it all vanished, replaced by a cold, absolute certainty. She was telling the truth. She was still clinging to him, her face buried in his chest. I am sorry, she whispered, her voice broken. I am so sorry, for Little Fawn, for the fire, for all of it, but I had to warn you, I cannot. She pulled back, her hands still clutching his shirt, and looked up at him. Her eyes were desperate, wild in the dark. I cannot pretend you do not exist anymore. I cannot just let him kill you. It was a confession. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact. Her world had narrowed down to this one. Terrible, simple truth. He held her, his arms wrapping around her. Just for a second. He held her tightly, feeling her heart hammer against his. He smelled the soap on her skin, the fear, and he knew what he had to do. He pulled back, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You have to go, now, before the light, ride hard, and do not stop. What will you do? She asked, her voice trembling. You warned me, he said. That is enough. Go, Evie. Go back to your safe world. He put her back on her pony, his hands at her waist, lifting her. He slapped the pony's rump hard. He watched her disappear into the blackness, a small, brave, foolish ghost. He ran. He did not ride. He ran, his feet striking the earth, back to the village. The council was still there, a circle of arguing, defeated men. Hawk strode into the center of the circle, breathing hard, his chest heaving. Stop, he commanded. They all looked at him. She came, he said. The white woman, Red Elk asked, his voice flat. She came to warn me. He told them. 2 days. At dawn. All the soldiers. They planned to trap us at the lake. To kill us all. Buffalo Horn leaped up. A trap. She lies. She leads you by the... She risked her life to tell me, Hawk said, his voice like stone. And I believe her. We will not be there. The Red Elk stood slowly. Will we run? You would have us run from our sacred water. We will not run, Hawk said, his voice filling with a new authority. We will move. The women, the children, the old ones. You, Uncle, you will lead them. Tonight, now, west, to the high caves. They will be safe there. And you, Buffalo Horn asked, his voice suspicious. I will stay, Hawk said, with 20 warriors, men who can run, and who can be silent. He looked at the circle of men. We will not be at the lake. We will be above the lake, in the rocks. We will not walk into their trap. We will watch. We will let the hawk see the fox, and then we will decide. Red Elk looked at his nephew. The boy who had been torn, the boy who had been soft, was gone. In his place was a warrior, but more, a strategist, a chief. He saw the man who had shown mercy, and he saw the woman who, in turn, had shown loyalty. The old man nodded, a slow, profound gesture. He placed his hand on Hawk's shoulder. He is right. This is a new war. We cannot fight it with old honor. We must fight it with new wisdom. He looked at Hawk. Live, to fight another way. Make them see what a Comanche warrior is. The sun broke over the eastern rim of the canyon, and the light that hit the sacred water was cold and sharp. It was the light of a blade. Nathan Crowell rode at the head of a column of 50 men. They moved with the jangling, metallic confidence of an unopposed force. He was in his element. This was not a negotiation. It was an erasure. Beside him, on a fine chestnut gelding, Silas Kane rode as if he were inspecting a new section of track. He was not a soldier, but he was the reason for this army. He was the cold mathematics behind the righteous, patriotic steel. "We should be in sight of their camp now, Captain," Silas said, his voice calm, as if discussing the weather. "They will be asleep," Nathan said, his voice tight with anticipation. He drew his saber, the rasp of the steel a sound of finality. He held it high. "Troopers forward at the gallop, no quarter." The column broke into a charge, a thunder of hooves. Men yelling, their voices echoing in the canyon. They burst through the willow trees and onto the flat, open ground by the lake, and found nothing. The echoes of their own shouts died, replaced by the heavy breathing of the horses. The soldiers pulled up, their mounts skittish, their faces confused. The camp was empty. There were a few dead fire pits, a few lodge poles, left behind, a broken pot. It was a ghost camp. Nathan sat on his horse, the saber suddenly looking ridiculous in his hand. He felt the eyes of his men. He felt the cold, appraising gaze of Silas Kane. He was a fool. He had charged an empty space. "Well, Captain," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet, "it seems your savages are not as predictable as we had hoped." Nathan's face was a mask of dark, humiliated fury. He sheathed his saber with a sharp, angry sound. "They have fled. They are cowards. It does not matter. The land is ours." Silas dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft mud. "An empty victory is not a victory, Captain. It is merely a lack of engagement. We must make a statement. We are here not just to claim, but to hold." He walked to a wagon that had accompanied the column, a wagon full of surveying equipment. He pulled out a long, sharpened oak stake with numbers burned into its side. "Here," he said, handing it to a trooper. "Right here, at the water's edge." He pointed to the large, flat rock, Evie's rock. "And the flag. I want the flag on that rise. And cut down some of these useless trees. We need a clear line of sight for the survey." High above, in a narrow cleft of rock on the canyon's western rim, Lone Hawk watched. He and his 20 warriors lay flat, invisible, their bodies painted with mud to match the stone. He had watched the soldiers charge. He had felt a grim satisfaction at their confusion. The plan was to let them tire themselves out, to let them declare their victory to an empty sky. But then he saw Silas Kane. He saw the trooper with the oak stake. He saw them walk, not to the center, not to the rise, but to the specific, flat rock. He watched them lift a heavy mallet. He watched them drive the stake, a thick, wooden violation, into the soft earth right beside the place where she had sat, where he had first seen her, where she had left the ribbon. A cold, white rage, a rage he had been holding in check, ignited. They were not just taking his land. They were not just taking the sacred water. They were driving a stake through the heart of his memory. As the soldier raised the mallet for another blow, a new sound echoed in the canyon. Not a war cry, not a gunshot. It was the rattle of a buckboard wagon, its wheels scraping on the rocky trail. A single wagon, pulled by one horse, appeared on the trail from the north. It was moving as fast as it dared. Evie Hart was standing, not sitting, holding the reins, her hair flying, her face a mask of pale terror. Beside her, slumped on the seat, was her father, Thomas Hart, his eyes wide, his hands gripping the dashboard. "Captain Crowell." Evie's voice was a thin, desperate cry that carried across the water. "Stop in God's name! Stop! There is no one here!" She hauled back on the reins, pulling the horse to a jarring halt in the open space between the soldiers and the empty camp. She jumped down, her skirts tangling, and ran forward. "There is no one here. You must stop. It is a mistake." Nathan Crowell, his face already dark with humiliation, turned to see his fiancée, disheveled, hysterical, her hair unbound, making a public spectacle of herself, ruining his military operation. Silas Kane smiled, a genuine reptilian smile. "Well, Captain," he said, loud enough for the nearby troopers to hear, "it seems the little bird has come to protect her nest. How very touching." He raised his voice, calling to Evie, his tone a mockery of politeness. "Are you here on behalf of your savage friend? Miss Hart, did he send you to beg for him?" Nathan's control snapped. This was the final, unforgivable humiliation. He strode toward Evie, his face a thundercloud. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice a low, vicious growl. "You are shaming me. You are consorting with them." He was shouting now, his jealousy and rage exploding, his voice echoing in the canyon's natural amphitheater. "What have you done with him here at this lake? What did you do with that savage?" He was not asking. He was accusing. He was convicting her in front of his men, in front of her father. Evie ripped her arm from his grip. The force of it made him stumble back. She was not a lady from Boston. She was not a hysterical girl. She was pure, cold, concentrated fire. She did not lower her voice. She raised it. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice shaking but carrying to every man on that shore. She turned, not just to Nathan, but to the troopers, to Silas, to her father, to the silent, watching cliffs. "You want to talk about a savage," she shouted. "I will tell you when 3 white men, 3 of your own kind, were about to murder my father and worse." Her voice broke, but she forced it on. "When we were about to die, he came a Comanche warrior. He fought for us. He saved our lives." She pointed a trembling finger at Nathan. "Not you. Captain, you were not there. He is the only man of honor, the only man of courage I have met in this entire God-forsaken land." High on the cliff, Hawk heard her, every word. He heard her defend him. He saw Nathan, his face inhuman with rage, raise his hand, his gloved hand, as if to strike her. He could not stay. It was not a plan. It was not a strategy. It was a reflex. His heart, his soul, his body moved. "Evie." The name was torn from his throat. He kicked his pony, sending it scrambling, sliding down a narrow, rocky game trail, a path no sane man would ride. He burst from the rocks, his own revolver, the one he had taken from the outlaw, in his hand. He did not fire. He did not yell a war cry. He simply appeared. He placed his paint pony, its sides heaving, directly between Evie and Nathan Crowell. The world stopped. A tableau. The Comanche warrior, his bare skin streaked with mud, his old revolver held steady, his eyes locked on Nathan, the captain, his hand frozen on the grip of his Colt, his face a mask of pure, murderous hatred, and Evie, standing between them, her chest heaving, her eyes wide. From the wagon, Thomas Hart moaned, "Oh, God, no, no!" It was not a duel, it was a mess. A nervous young trooper on the flank, seeing a painted warrior appear from nowhere with a gun, did what he was trained to do. He panicked. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 10 feet from the pony. But the sound broke the spell. On the ridge, Buffalo Horn saw the puff of smoke. He saw the soldier fire. He thought it was the signal. He thought Hawk was being killed. He let out a piercing, screaming war cry. "Hey-ya!" The other warriors, hidden on the ridge, rose as one. They fired, a volley of arrows and rifle shots. But they fired as Hawk had commanded. Not at the men, at the horses, at the rocks, in the air. It was a storm of noise and terror, designed to confuse, to panic, not to kill. The cavalry unit dissolved. Men, who had been ready for a charge on a sleeping camp, were not ready for an ambush from above. Horses screamed and reared. Troopers fell. Men shouted for orders, their eyes frantically scanning the cliffs, firing wildly at shadows. In the chaos, Silas Kane dove behind the supply wagon, pulling his own small pistol, his eyes darting, trying to see where the advantage lay. Nathan was not a coward. He was a soldier. He roared, "Return fire to the cliffs, Sergeant. Form a line." But in that first wild volley, a bullet, a stray shot, a ricochet, whined through the air. It struck the side of Hart's buckboard. Thomas Hart, who had been rising from his seat, cried out, a thin, surprised sound. He slumped forward, his hands clutching his chest, a dark, terrible stain spreading through his simple wool jacket. "Papa!" Evie's scream cut through the gunfire. She ran to the wagon, trying to climb in, to reach her father. Hawk was off his pony in an instant. He was not a warrior now. He was the man who had caught her by the lake. He ran to her, to the wagon. "Get down!" he yelled. He grabbed her by the waist, pulling her back, shielding her with his own body, just as another bullet, aimed at him, tore through the air. He grunted, a sharp, violent sound. His body slammed back, but he did not fall. He stumbled, pushing her down behind the relative safety of the wagon wheel. The bullet had caught him, a tearing, burning fire in his left shoulder. They were huddled in the dirt, her father, bleeding, dying, in the wagon above them. Hawk, bleeding, gritting his teeth, beside her. The world was a nightmare of screams, smoke, and gunfire. Evie saw the blood. It was pouring from his shoulder. She was not a lady. She was not a child. She acted. She ripped a long, white strip from the hem of her petticoat. She ignored her own father's groans for one terrible second. She grabbed Hawk's arm. "Hold still," she commanded. She pressed the wadded cloth, hard, into the bleeding wound. He hissed, his eyes squeezing shut in pain. Nathan Crowell saw it. Through the drifting smoke, through the chaos of his disintegrating command, he saw it. He saw his betrothed, her hands covered in blood, pressing her own undergarments into the bleeding, bare flesh of the savage. He saw her tenderness. He saw her, in the middle of a battle, choosing to nurse the enemy. It was the final, unforgivable betrayal. The world went red. He began to walk toward the wagon, his steps slow, deliberate. He raised his Colt revolver, his arm steady. "Evelyn," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm amid the noise. "Get away from him." Hawk saw him, tried to raise his own revolver, but his arm was on fire, useless. Evie looked up. She saw her fiancé, 10 feet away, his face a mask of cold, inhuman rage. The black hole of the pistol barrel aimed not at her, but at the man beside her. She moved. She did not think. She scrambled to her feet, placing her own body, her small, shaking, soot-stained body, directly between Nathan's gun and Hawk's chest. "No," she said. "Evelyn, I will not say it again. Get away from him." She looked at him. Her face was streaked with soot, with her father's blood, with Hawk's blood. She was not a lady. She was not an omen. She was a woman, in the very last second of her life. "He is the one," she said, her voice low, trembling, but fierce as a diamond. "Not you. It was always him." She looked Nathan Crowell, her betrothed, her protector, her captor, dead in the eye. "If you shoot him, Nathan, you shoot me. If you kill him, you will kill the last part of me that is left here. Do it." She had made her choice. She had drawn her line, and she had done it in front of her father, her lover, her enemy, and the entire United States Army. Evie's words hung in the air, a final, impossible challenge. "Do it!" Nathan Crowell's face, which had been a mask of cold rage, began to break. His handsome features twisted, his lip pulling back from his teeth. He was trembling, not with fear, but with an impotence that was more maddening than any bullet. This chit, this girl, his property, was choosing a savage over him, in front of his men, at the very moment of his victory. "Honor," he hissed, the word a poison in his own mouth. "You, a camp follower, From his cover behind the supply wagon, Silas Kane watched this pathetic breakdown with disgust. The captain was a fool, a preening popinjay obsessed with the girl. This was not about honor. It was about assets. The girl was a witness to the arson. She was a liability. The Comanche was a threat. They were two variables that needed to be erased. "Captain," Silas called, his voice sharp and encouraging. "The girl is hysterical. She is clearly a collaborator, a traitor to her own kind. Settle this. It is a military necessity. Clean the slate." He was urging him, giving him the excuse, the military order, to mop up the entire messy situation. High on the cliff, Red Elk watched. He saw the white soldier's arm, the one holding the pistol, remain steady. He saw his nephew, wounded, trying to push himself up. He saw the woman, small and brave, standing as a human shield. And he heard the other white man, the one in the suit, urge the soldier to kill. This was not a battle. This was a murder. He did not shout. He did not need to. He raised his hand, a sharp, cutting motion against the sky. It was the signal. 10 of his warriors, who had used the initial chaos to creep like shadows along the canyon's eastern flank, now rose as one. They were not where the soldiers were looking. They were behind them, and to the side. A new volley of gunfire erupted. It was not a scattered, panicked fire. It was a controlled, terrifying wall of sound. The warriors, following Red Elk's last, desperate command, did not fire to kill. They fired to terrify. They shot at the rocks around the soldiers. Bullets whined, ricocheting with terrifying, wasp-like screams. Stone chips exploded from the cliff face, stinging the men. It was a message. "We are all around you. You cannot see us. We could kill you if we chose." The new chaos was absolute. The soldiers, who had been focused on the standoff, dove for cover, yelling, their formation breaking completely. "From the rocks, they are behind us. We are flanked." Nathan himself was forced to spin around, his attention ripped from Evie as he roared at his men to form a perimeter. In that single fractured moment, Silas Kane saw his chance. The soldiers were distracted. The captain was useless. The girl was the key. If she lived, she would talk. She would tell her story of the heroic Comanche. She would speak of the fire. She had to be silenced. He rose from behind the wagon, his small, pearl-handled pistol in his hand. His face was calm, his movements economical. This was just business. He aimed a steady, two-handed grip, not at the warrior, but at the back of Evie's heart. Lone Hawk, his world a haze of pain and shouting, was not watching the soldiers. He was watching the wagon. He was watching the other snake. He had seen him hide. Through the smoke, he saw the glint of metal. He saw the gun. He saw it point, not at him, but at her. "Evie, down!" he roared, a sound of pure, desperate agony. He used his good leg and his good arm, hooking her around the waist, pulling her with all his remaining strength. He was too late for the shot, but not for her. He pulled her down, stumbling, falling, landing hard on top of her, his body shielding hers, just as Silas fired. The bullet screamed past, so close it tore the fabric on his shoulder and buried itself in the wooden frame of the wagon. A young trooper, not 15 feet away, saw the whole thing. He had been diving for cover himself. He saw the civilian, Mr. Kane, the man who had come with the captain, deliberately aim and fire at Miss Hart, the captain's own betrothed. The trooper's mind, trained for combat, made a simple calculation. A man in a suit was firing at a white woman, at their side. "Traitor!" he yelled, his voice cracking. As Silas, His face a mask of fury at having missed, brought the pistol around for a second shot. The trooper lunged. He did not fire. He did what he was trained to do to a disarmed opponent. He grabbed the gun. He slammed into Silas, his big hand grabbing the smaller man's wrist, twisting it. Silas, surprised by the weight, struggled. "Get off me, you fool!" The trooper twisted, hard. Silas's finger was still on the trigger. The gun, caught between them, discharged. A single, wet, muffled pop. Silas Kane froze. The struggle stopped. The trooper let go, his face pale with horror. Silas looked down at his own gray wool suit. A small, dark hole was blossoming over his heart. He looked up, his eyes wide, his expression not of pain, but of a profound, utter confusion. This was not in his ledgers. This variable had not been accounted for. He made a small, wet sound. He slumped, falling sideways, his cheek landing in the muddy, desecrated water. He died, his eyes open, staring at the lake he had tried to buy with paper, and now had paid for with his own blood. The gunfire from the cliff stopped. The sudden, absolute silence was more shocking than the noise. It was broken only by the wind, the distant thunder, and the terrible, ragged gasping from the buckboard. The young trooper stood up slowly, his rifle at his side. He looked at Captain Crowell. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking, He tried to kill her, Mr. Kane. He shot at Miss Hart." The other soldiers, emerging from behind rocks, stared. They looked at the body of the rich railroad man, floating in the shallow water. They looked at their captain, who was still standing, his pistol in his hand, his face a mask of incomprehensible rage. They looked at the woman, his betrothed, whom the civilian had just tried to murder. And they looked at the Comanche, who was bleeding, shielding her. This was not a battle. This was madness. One by one, their rifles were lowered. The chain of command was broken. But something more important was, too, their certainty. They had come to fight savages. They did not know who the savage was anymore. Nathan Crowell looked at the faces of his men. He saw their confusion. He saw their doubt. He saw, in the eyes of the young trooper, an accusation. He was alone. His patron was dead. His men were wavering. His betrothed had chosen another. His enemy was still alive. He had lost. He lowered his arm. The pistol felt impossibly heavy. His authority, his honor, his entire future had evaporated in the smoke. A voice, deep and calm, called from the cliff, "It is finished." Red Elk stepped onto an open ledge, in full view. He held no weapon. He just stood, a tall, regal figure against the graying sky. The troopers tensed, but did not raise their rifles. "This land," Red Celt said, his slow, careful English cutting through the silence, "has drunk enough blood." He gestured, not to the railroad stake, but to the body of Silas Kane. "Your road. Go south," he pointed. "Go around. You come back to this water." His voice did not rise, but it filled with a cold, hard power. "There is no peace, not for you, not for your children, ever." A wet, choking cough came from the wagon. "Nathan?" Evie scrambled out from under Hawk, her hands flying to her mouth. "Papa?" Thomas Hart was leaning over the side of the buckboard. His face was as gray as the sky. His shirt was a solid sheet of dark red. "Nathan," he gasped again. Nathan turned, his face numb. If you have any honor," Thomas choked, a bloody froth on his lips. "Stop! Just stop! Let them go!" He looked past Nathan, his eyes finding Evie, and then Hawk. My debt to Silas." A terrible, gurgling laugh escaped him. "It means nothing now." He had made his confession. He had seen the truth, his obsession with his debt, his weakness before Cain. had brought this. He had sold his daughter, and now his own life. This was the end. Nathan was surrounded by the living, by the dead, by the dying, by his own mutinous men. To continue the attack now would be to step over the line from soldier to butcher, and he knew, with a cold certainty, that his men would not follow. He chose, not out of morality, but out of survival. He turned, his back ramrod straight. "Sergeant!" he barked, his voice a hoarse croak. The sergeant, his face a picture of pure relief, snapped to attention. "Sir, we are withdrawing. Retrieve the body of Mr. Kane. We are returning to the fort. Now." "Yes, sir." He would not look at Evie. He could not. He strode to his horse, his movements stiff. He grabbed the pommel. He mounted. He had to look one last time. He saw her. She was not running to her father. She was not looking at him. She was on her knees beside the Comanche, her small, bloody hands already examining the wound in his shoulder, her face a mask of fierce, terrified concentration. She had chosen. The cold, dead ash in his stomach flared. One last time, a pinpoint of pure, acid hatred. "You chose," he said, his voice flat, carrying across the silent space. "You chose that lying in the mud with a redskin." Hawk heard it, the final, useless insult. He roared, a low sound from his chest, and tried to surge forward, his good arm pushing, to kill the man who had shot his cousin, who had insulted his woman. Evie's hand, bloody and small, slammed onto his good shoulder, her fingers digging in. "No," she commanded, her voice fierce. "Stop! He is just noise. He is nothing. No more blood. Not for him." Hawk froze. He looked at her. Her face was streaked with mud, with his blood, with her father's blood. And she was right. The man on the horse was just empty air. Hawk slumped back, the last of his strength, his rage, draining away, leaving only the white-hot fire in his shoulder. Nathan saw it. He saw her stop him. He saw her control him. It was, in a way, a deeper wound than any bullet. He said nothing more. He spurred his horse, savagely, and galloped away, his back to the ruin he had made. The soldiers followed, silent. They worked quickly, their movements ashamed. They cut Silas Kane's body from the water, wrapped it in a canvas tarp, and slung it, dripping, over a pack horse. One of them, the young trooper, walked over and kicked the oak railroad stake, snapping its pointed end. Before he mounted, they were gone. The silence that returned was absolute. It was the silence of death, of the end of a world. Evie knelt, frozen, between her dead father in the wagon and her wounded lover on the ground. A low, deep rumble, not horses, not gunfire, thunder. A cool wind gusted across the lake, carrying the scent of dust and rain. A drop hit Evie's hand. Then another. A steady, soft rain began to fall, pattering on the surface of the lake, hissing on the hot metal of the discarded rifles, turning the dust to dark mud. It ran in small rivulets, washing the blood from the rocks, washing the soot from Evie's face. "Papa," she whispered. She looked up. Thomas Hart's eyes were open, sightless, catching the rain. A sound, a low, animal sound of grief, tore itself from her throat. Hawk, his teeth gritted, used the wagon wheel to haul himself up. He was swaying, his vision blurring, but he stood. He stood. He reached for her, his good arm wrapping around her, pulling her to him. She buried her face in his chest, her hands clutching his breechcloth, her small, shaking body clinging to his. He held her, his chin resting on the top of her wet hair. As the rain washed them both, his blood and her tears mixing, running together, sinking into the thirsty, sacred, unforgiving earth. The rain, it had been a cold, shocking, cleansing thing. It stopped as quickly as it had begun, leaving the world a bleeding, muddy ruin. Hawk held her, his body a solid, warm wall against her back, as she stared at her father's still form in the wagon. Then, a movement from the rocks. Red Elk. He was beside them, his face a mask of ancient sorrow. "We must go, little Hawk. The others will be safe, but we must go. More blue coats will come."
My father?
Evie whispered, the word a numb, stupid sound. Hawk moved, his body a map of pain. He pulled himself up on the wagon wheel, his wounded shoulder screaming, and looked down at Thomas Hart. A thin, rattling, impossible breath escaped the man's bloody lips. "He is alive," Hawk said, his voice thick with disbelief. "He is alive." The next few minutes were a blur, a nightmare of logistics. The Comanche warriors, ghosts in the gray light, emerged. They did not speak. They cut the dead horse from the harness. They helped Hawk lift Thomas, a groaning, barely conscious sack, from the wagon bed, laying him as gently as they could on the floor of the buckboard. Red Elk looked at Evie, his eyes seeing deep into her. "You go, now. We go a different way." Hawk was pale, his face beaded with sweat. He clutched his shoulder, where Evie's makeshift bandage was already soaked dark red. "Go," he said to her. "Get, doctor, go." She wanted to stay, to go with him, to tend his wound, but her father was dying. He touched her cheek, his good hand, leaving a muddy, bloody smear. Then he turned, and, with Red Elk, vanished back into the rocks. She got her father back to the ranch. She never knew how. She walked the 10 miles, leading the single, exhausted horse. Her father's terrible, rhythmic groans, the only sound in a dead world. It was noon when she arrived. The doctor from Dry Mesa, a gruff, tobacco-chewing man named Harris, came that evening. He pulled the bullet from her father's chest, his hand surprisingly steady. "Missed his heart," the doctor grunted, dropping the lead slug into a tin bowl. "Missed his lung, bounced off a rib and tore him up inside, but it missed the important bits." He looked at Evie, his eyes not unkind. "He will live, but this rib, it is near his spine. He will not be the same. He will not be working this land again, not ever." Evie sat by his bed for 3 days and 3 nights, as he raved in a fever. Her world shrunk to this one. Small, hot room. Her father lived, but the man she knew, the man who had built this ranch, was gone. The official story, the one that went back east, was simple. Captain Nathan Crowell, in a brave, preemptive strike, had scattered a large band of hostiles. During the engagement, the railroad liaison, Mr. Silas Kane, had been tragically killed by a stray bullet, a sad but necessary cost of taming the West. The real story, the one whispered in the barracks and in the back rooms of the general store, was different. Troopers talked. They spoke of the captain's fiancée and the savage. They spoke of the railroad man, Kane, aiming at the girl. They spoke of the captain, his face like a thundercloud, his honor stained. The Army hated scandals. It hated complicated stories. Captain Nathan Crowell was not court-martialed. He was not dishonored. He was transferred. Within a week, he was gone, reassigned to a sun-blasted, forgotten post in the Arizona Territory. His authority, his cold gaze, his hateful promises were removed from her life. He kept his rank, but he had lost his world. The investigation into the death of Silas Kane was closed. Accidental discharge during a hostile engagement. With Kane dead, the railroad corporation did what it always did. It consulted its ledgers. The lake route was now complicated. It was stained with the blood of its own executive. It was politically messy. The local population was unsettled. A different route, 30 miles to the south, was longer, but it was empty. It was cheaper. They quietly pulled their survey teams. The lake, for the first time in months, was left alone. For the people, it was the end. The soldiers were gone, but the threat remained. The sacred water was now on a white man's map. It was a known, defined place. Red Elk called a council in the high caves where the women and children had hidden. "They have left the water," he said, his voice heavy. "But they know where it is. We cannot live there. To stay is to invite the real army, the one that does not stop." Hawk sat beside him, his left arm in a sling of clean buckskin, his face grim. His uncle was right. They had won the battle, but the war was over. "We are alive," Red Elk said, his voice a low, sad drum. "We have kept our people. This is more valuable than land. A dead man cannot honor a dead land." They made the choice. The entire band packed their lodges, their few possessions, their memories. They began the long, slow trek west, deeper into the arid high country, a place of stone and wind, a place the Iron Horse would not want, a place they could be, for a little while, forgotten. Hawk rode with them. He was a warrior. This was his blood. This was his duty. But his spirit was not on the trail. It was back at the ranch, in a small, hot room. He was torn, ripped in two. To go was to live, to stay. What was that to be a tame Indian, to be hunted by both sides? He sat with Red Elk one night by a small, smokeless fire. "My heart," Hawk said, "is not here." Red Elk looked at his nephew. He saw the wound on his shoulder. He saw the deeper one inside. "This woman, she is your pa," he said, using the word for water. "She has changed your path, your spirit." "I must stay with the people," Hawk said. It was the law. It was his life. "Your father and I," Red Elk said, his voice soft. "We fought for the past, for the land that was. Your fight is new. It is for a future that looks different." He stared into the night. "The people are safe. For now. You are not. A man cannot live for yesterday. Go, find your own peace." Evie was adrift. She was a nurse. She was a rancher. She was, in the eyes of the white community, a pariah. She had lost her place. She was no longer the captain's respectable betrothed. She was the hysterical girl who had stood with a savage. She was the one who had brought on the trouble. The women from the fort, the wives of the officers, turned their backs when she came to the general store. The men who had once treated her with a distant, chivalrous respect now looked at her with a new, speculative, hungry gaze. A woman who had been with an Indian was a woman who was available. She met their stares. She had faced down Nathan Crowell's pistol. She was not afraid of their whispers. She had lost her reputation, her good name. She had lost the gilded cage, and in its place, she had found a cold, hard, and terrible freedom. Her father healed, slowly, his body, not his spirit. He sat in a chair on the porch, a wool blanket over his now useless legs, and watched the dust devils spin. He was a broken man, and in his breaking, he finally found honesty. One evening, Evie brought him a bowl of broth. He did not eat. He just stared at the horizon.
"I did it,"
he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Did what, Papa?" "All of it. The debt. Silas, I was a weak fool. Afraid of losing this dirt." He laughed, a dry, terrible, choking sound. "I was going to sell the land, the lake. I was going to sell you, Evie, for a good match, to save my own skin." He turned, his eyes, watery and old, meeting hers. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I am so sorry. I tried to put you in a cage, and I ended up in one myself." Evie knelt by his chair, her hand covering his. It felt like dry leaves. "I know, Papa, I know. That Comanche," Thomas whispered, the word still strange on his tongue. "He saved me. He saved me twice. Yes, she said, her heart aching. And you? He looked at her, his gaze clear for the first time in months. You love him. It was not a question. She did not look away. Her throat was tight, but she would not lie. Not anymore. Yes. She braced for the explosion. The rage, the final, patriarchal curse. Thomas' heart just smiled, a weary, impossibly sad, and gentle smile. Well, he said, his hand patting hers, after all this, if any man in this whole damned world deserves your goodness, I suppose it is the one who saved my life. Twice. She had not seen Hawk in a month. She assumed he was gone, that the people had vanished like smoke. She went about her chores, her heart a dull, hollow ache. She was in Dry Mesa, loading the buckboard with the meager supplies she could afford, when she felt it, a stillness, a shift in the air. He was there. He was across the street, sitting on his paint pony. He was not hiding. He was just there. His arm was out of the sling, but he held the reins in his right hand. He was with 3 other warriors, their ponies loaded with supplies. They were not here to stay. They were here to leave. She stopped. The sack of flour in her hand suddenly felt too heavy. She set it in the wagon. The storekeeper was staring. The whole street was staring. She did not care. She walked away from the wagon, away from her father's credit, away from her life. She walked across the dusty street, her boots raising small puffs of dust. She stopped, right by his knee. You are going, she said. It was not a question. We must move, he said. His voice was low, and it seemed to vibrate in her very bones. He was looking at her, his eyes drinking her in, as if he were a dying man and she were water. Your shoulder, she said, her hand rising, wanting, needing to touch him. It is strong, almost. The silence stretched. They were an island, in a sea of hostile, whispering faces. This was the real world. A white woman, marked as a traitor, a Comanche warrior, marked as a savage, in the middle of a white man's street. There was no what if. There was only what is. My father, he is alive. Thank you, she whispered. He is a strong man, he replied, a sign of respect. This was it, the end. This was the last time. Evie, he said, his voice a rough, breaking sound. Hawk, she whispered back. He leaned down from the saddle, in the middle of the street, in front of all of them. He did not care. It was madness. He put his good right hand on the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the hair at her nape. He pulled her forward. She rose on her toes, her hands coming up to rest on his thigh, on the warm, solid, living muscle, on the breathing side of his pony. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a polite kiss. It was a kiss of goodbye. It was a kiss of starvation, of everything they had almost had, of everything they would never be. It was deep, and it was long, and it tasted of dust and blood and rain, and a future that was being stolen from them at that very second. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. He was breathing hard, his eyes closed. I cannot, he began. I know, she whispered. Tears were streaming, cutting clean paths through the dust on her face. Go, please, be safe. He pulled his head up. He looked at her. One last burning, terrible time. He had to memorize her face. He straightened in his saddle, his face becoming the iron mask of a warrior, a mask that was shattered. He did not say another word. He turned his pony, a sharp, violent motion, and he rode. He did not look back. He and his men rode out of the town, not fast, but with a terrible, final purpose. And Evie Hart stood in the middle of the street, her hand on her mouth, and watched him until he was just another speck of dust disappearing into the sun. The world did not end. It just grew quiet. 4 months passed. The high plains winter, a brutal, scouring thing, locked the land in ice and silence. When the thaw came, it was to a different world. The sound of the railroad, the percussive hammering and the distant shouts, was gone. The surveyors, following the news of Silas Kane's death, had packed their instruments. His death was a line item in a distant ledger, a messy complication. And the men who read those ledgers had simply recalculated the cost. The new route, 30 miles to the south, was longer. But it was empty, and it was clean. The Iron Horse would bypass them entirely. The Hart Ranch began to breathe again. The burned-out shell of the barn was not rebuilt as a barn. Thomas Hart, now a permanent resident of a wheeled chair on the front porch, watched with his new, quiet eyes as Evie directed the work. The new structure was long and low, built of raw, sweet-smelling pine. The sign she painted was Simple Hearts Mercantile. It was a desperate gamble, born of necessity. With the railroad moving south, the old north-south trail, the one that passed their ranch, was now the main artery for freighters, for trappers, for the Kiowa and the Arapaho moving to the agencies, for anyone not taking the train. And Evie ran it. She was the one who haggled with the hard-faced freighters over the price of flour. She was the one who measured out coffee beans and twists of tobacco. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and strong. Her father, his legs useless, became the bookkeeper. His mind was sharp, and his hand, when it held a pen, was steady. They served everyone. When a few wary Kiowa riders, their faces hollow from a hard winter, stopped, she traded them flour and sugar for cured blankets. When troopers from the fort passed, she sold them tobacco, at the same price. She was building a bridge, one sack of beans at a time. News from the people, from the Comanche, was rare, like water in the high desert. It came one afternoon in the form of a grizzled, sour-smelling trapper named Jed. He had been deep in the Western Territories, and his pack was heavy with beaver pelts. He dropped them on her counter and looked at her. His eyes narrowed with a not unkind curiosity. "You be the girl," he stated. "The one from the fight at the lake." Evie, who was measuring out salt, did not look up. "I sell supplies. Mr. What do you need?" He grunted, a small sound of approval. "Coffee and powder, if you have it." As she worked, he pulled a small pipe from his vest. "I saw 'em. Red Elk's band. They are high up, in the stone country. It is hard land." He lit his pipe, the smoke a thick, acrid cloud. "They are alive, and they are hungry, but they are free. For now." He rummaged in his beaded bag. "The old man, Red Elk, he gave me this, told me to give it to the woman of the lake." He placed a small, cloth-wrapped bundle on the counter. Evie's hands, the ones that had been so steady, began to tremble. She wiped them on her apron and fumbled with the string. Inside, lying on a piece of soft, white doeskin, was a necklace. It was a simple leather thong, strung with polished river stones and the tiny, iridescent blue feathers of a mountain bird. And tied to the center, its color faded, stained by rain and mud, was a small strip of silk, her blue ribbon. "Did you—" she began, her voice a dry whisper, her throat closing. "Did you see a warrior named—" "The one they call Hawk?" Jed asked, puffing on his pipe. "Aye, I saw him. He's the one holding them together. He hunts, he scouts. He is not a happy man." He looked at her, his assessment shrewd. "He is a man walking with a ghost, walking in two worlds and belonging to neither." She clutched the necklace. He was alive. He was alive. That was all. She looked up at the trapper, her eyes burning, but she did not cry. "The coffee, mister, that will be 50 cents. She did not return to the east. The letters from Boston, from her shocked and horrified aunts. Letters that spoke of her disgrace and offered a safe passage back to civilization, went unanswered. How could she explain? How could she describe this land, this life, this ache, in words they would understand? She had been offered a way out of the gilded cage, and she had taken it. She was no longer a lady in waiting. She was a woman of the West, her face browned by the sun, her name a quiet scandal, and she was, in her own strange way, content. She wore the necklace. She wore it every day, tucked beneath the high collar of her calico dress. It was a secret, a small, tangible weight against her skin, a reminder. 2 more months passed. The land was in the grip of high, dry summer, and Lone Hawk came back. He came alone. He left the people in the high stone country, his uncle's blessing a heavy, silent weight on his good shoulder. He rode for 3 days, his paint pony moving like a shadow, avoiding patrols, avoiding trails. He had to see. He came to the lake at dawn, just as he had that very first morning, a lifetime ago. He slid from his pony, his knife in his hand, his senses screaming, half expecting to see the glint of a rifle barrel, the blue of a soldier's coat. The lake was empty. It was exactly as it had been. The water was a sheet of turquoise and rose, reflecting the clean, new sky. The cottonwoods whispered. The hawk he had seen, that first day, seemed to still be circling. He walked to the place where the soldiers had been. The churned mud was gone, washed clean by the rain, overgrown with new, thick, green reeds. The oak stake was gone, the one the trooper had kicked. The land had healed itself. He walked to the flat rock, Evie's rock. He touched the stone. It was just warm from the sun. He had not been defeated. The people had not been defeated. The sacred water was still sacred. It had not been beaten. It had simply waited. The land endured. He rode to the ranch. He saw, from a distance, the new building, the simple, painted sign, Hart's Mercantile. He saw the wagons, the signs of life, and he almost turned away. He was a ghost. He did not belong here. What was he doing? She was a white woman. She ran a white man's post. He was a Comanche warrior. He was nothing. But he had come this far. He rode his pony, not in a charge, not in a stealthy creep, but in a slow, steady walk, up the main path, in the middle of the bright, hot afternoon. It was as if a bell had been rung. 2 freighters, loading grain, stopped. Their hands went, slow and deliberate, to the pistols at their hips. A rancher, tying his horse, froze. One hand on the knot, the world went silent. A lone Comanche warrior, his hair loose, a puckered, angry scar branding his left shoulder, sat on a paint pony, watching the house. He was not painted for war. He looked tired. He did not look at the men. He looked at the porch. He looked at the open, shadowed doorway. And Evie came out? She had been sorting beans, her back aching. She felt the silence, the sudden, heavy absence of sound that meant only one of 2 things, a rattlesnake or a gun. She wiped her hands on her apron, her heart a cold, hard knot. She stepped out onto the porch, squinting into the sun. He was there. He was not a ghost. He was real. He was thinner, his face harder, carved, the lines around his eyes deeper. But he was there. His eyes, those dark, intense. Hawk's eyes were fixed on her. He was looking at her, a woman, her face smudged with flour, her hands red, and he was looking at her throat. She was wearing the necklace. He slid from his pony. It was not a gesture of aggression or of surrender. It was just a man, dismounting. He let the reins fall, and he walked toward her. The freighters did not move. The rancher did not move. This was not their business. This was something older and deeper. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. It was not the desperate meeting of thieves in the dark. It was not the panicked joining of two worlds in a firefight. It was two people, standing, breathing. "You are alive?" she said, her voice a low, steady thing. "I am," he said. She came down the steps, slowly. Her hand, of its own will, rose. She touched the scar on his shoulder. It was ropey and hard and real. It healed. "You have a good hand," he said, his voice a low rasp. She laughed, a small, sudden, watery sound. I do." She held up the faded blue ribbon, which she had untied from the necklace and tied to her apron string. "Red Elk, he is old, he is sad, but he is alive." He looked at her, his eyes taking in the woman she had become, the strength in her. "You are a strong woman, Evie Hart." "You are a stubborn man, Lone Hawk," she replied, her voice soft. They sat on the edge of the porch, in the dust, in the heat. The freighters, uncomfortable, finished loading their wagon and left. The rancher, with one last, confused look, mounted and rode away. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They just talked. They talked about the people, about the hard winter and the new, hard land. They talked about the trading post, about her father. "This," she said, gesturing to the small, raw pine building. "It is not much, but it is a start, a place where people can meet, without guns." He nodded, understanding. "My people, they have horses, good horses, but no place to trade." She looked at him, the idea forming, bright and clear. "A horse station," she said. "A place to trade horses, to fix wagons, a place for both." "A place," he said, testing the word, savoring it. "In the middle." "Yes," she said, her heart, for the first time in months, feeling full. "In the middle." A sound, a dry scrape of wood on wood, came from the doorway. Thomas Hart had wheeled himself to the threshold. He had been sitting there, in the shadows, listening. He looked old and frail and broken, but his eyes were clear. He looked at the young warrior sitting on his porch, next to his daughter. He looked at their hands, not touching, but resting only inches apart on the worn porch step. "Hawk," Thomas said, his voice a dry rattle. Hawk stood, instantly, a gesture of respect for the elder. My legs are gone," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly strong. "But my hands, they still work. I can keep a book." He looked at Hawk, a hard, long, assessing stare. "She is everything. She is all I have left, and she is fire. She is wild." He paused, and he gave his blessing. It was not a prayer. It was a command. "If my daughter chooses you, I ask only one thing." Hawk waited. "Do not ever try to put her in a cage. Keep her free, freer than I ever did." Hawk looked at the old man. He saw the pain. He saw the honesty. He saw the love. He nodded. Once, a solemn, binding promise. That evening, as the sky turned to a deep, bruised purple, they rode, he on his paint, she on her mare. They rode up the low rise behind the ranch, the one that overlooked the vast, empty plains. They sat on their horses, side by side, in the growing dark. Far to the south, a tiny, moving pinprick of light. The train, the new route. It was a distant, harmless thing. To the north, unseen, but felt, was the lake. The air was cool, smelling of sage, dust, and the promise of night. They sat in a comfortable, easy silence. The war was over. The fight was just beginning. Evie finally broke the silence, her voice soft in the dusk. She leaned her head, just for a moment, against his good shoulder. "The day you found me at the lake," she whispered, "you lost your peace." He looked out at the vast darkness, his hand finding hers, his fingers lacing with hers. "Yes." "And I," she said, her voice finding its strength, "I found my freedom." He was silent for a long moment. He turned his head, his gaze finding hers in the dark. He brought her hand, the one with the calluses, the one with the flower under the nails, to his lips. He kissed her knuckles. "And today," Lone Hawk said, his voice simple and true and absolute, "we choose each other, forever, in this land." She smiled. She did not cry. She smiled. She squeezed his hand. They sat, two small, defiant shapes against the enormous star-filled sky. They were small. They were tiny, but they were not afraid. They were the future, a difficult, dangerous, and beautiful future, born in a sacred water and built in the middle, together. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.